Our teacher and mother of 3 children is fired for helping a student with no money. Years later, a millionaire knocks on her door and she burst in tears. If you like our content, consider subscribing to the channel. Your story starts now. The school cafeteria hummed with the chatter of students and the clinking of metal trays against tables. Maria Oliveira moved between the crowded tables, her observant eyes scanning the room as they had done for the past 15 years. Teaching wasn't just a profession for her, it was a calling, a purpose that pulled her from bed each morning despite the mounting difficulties that plagued her life. She noticed him immediately. In the far corner, separated from the boisterous groups of children, sat Tiago, a thin boy with clothes that hung loosely from his frame. His shoulders were hunched forward, one hand clutching his stomach while the other rested on the empty table before him. The scene struck Maria like a physical blow. She recognized the look in his eyes, had seen it reflected in her own mirror, on the mornings when she sacrificed her breakfast so her children could eat. Maria weaved through the tables, her worn shoes making soft sounds against the linoleum floor. As she approached, Tiago's eyes darted up, then quickly returned to the table's surface. Shame radiated from him, the particular kind of shame that poverty breeds in children who understand too early that they have less than others. "Aren't you going to eat today, Tiago?" Maria asked softly, taking the seat across from him. The boy shook his head, his voice barely audible when he finally replied, "Forgot my money." Maria knew better. This wasn't forgetfulness, it was empty pockets and empty cupboards at home. She had taught long enough to recognize the signs, the more careful preservation of school supplies, the same clothes worn too many days in a row, the hunger that couldn't be disguised. Her hand moved to her pocket, fingers brushing against the few bills she had carefully set aside that morning. That money was meant for milk. Her 3 children were waiting at home, expecting dinner that would now be a little less substantial. But how could she leave this child hungry while she had something to give? "Wait here," she said, rising from the table. From across the cafeteria, Eduardo Mendez, the school's newly appointed supervisor, watched with narrowed eyes as Maria approached the lunch counter. His rigid posture and clipboard clutched tightly against his chest signaled his commitment to order and rules, qualities that had earned him his position but had done little to endear him to the staff. Maria handed her money to the lunch lady. "For Tiago," she said quietly, nodding toward the boy. The woman hesitated, glancing toward Eduardo, but Maria's determined expression left no room for argument. A tray was prepared, and Maria carried it back to Tiago herself. The boy's eyes widened at the sight of food. "But I don't have—" "It's taken care of," Maria interrupted gently, sliding the tray in front of him. "Everyone forgets sometimes." As Tiago began to eat, the tension in his small body visibly relaxed. Maria smiled, knowing she had made the right choice. From across the room, she caught Eduardo's disapproving stare but chose to ignore it. Some rules mattered less than a child's empty stomach. What Maria didn't know, couldn't have known, was that this simple act of kindness would cost her everything, only to return it tenfold in the years to come. The summons came during Maria's morning class. A student office assistant appeared at her classroom door with a note. "Report to the principal's office immediately." Maria's stomach tightened. In 15 years of teaching, she had never been called away from her class like this. She quickly assigned her students a reading passage and stepped into the hallway, smoothing her modest skirt with trembling hands. The walk to Principal Vargas's office felt interminable. Each step on the polished floor echoed in the empty corridor. Maria had always loved this school, from its sun-dappled classrooms to the colorful student artwork that adorned the walls. It had been her sanctuary, a place where she could make a difference despite her own struggles. When she arrived, Eduardo Mendez was already there, standing like a sentinel beside Principal Vargas's desk. The principal herself, a woman who had once been Maria's ally, sat with hands folded tightly, her expression unreadable. "Please sit down, Maria," Principal Vargas said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Maria complied, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. "Is there a problem?" Eduardo stepped forward, clipboard at the ready. Yesterday at 12:35 p.m., you purchased a meal for student Tiago Santos using your personal funds. This constitutes a direct violation of School Policy 22B, which clearly states that faculty are prohibited from providing financial assistance to students without proper administrative channels. Maria blinked, momentarily stunned. I was hungry. He didn't have lunch money. There are procedures for students in need, Eduardo continued, his voice clipped and professional. Forms to fill out, assessments to be made. Your actions circumvented these established protocols. He needed food, not paperwork, Maria said, her voice gaining strength as indignation replaced shock. By the time any assessment was done, he would have gone another day without eating. Principal Vargas sighed, finally meeting Maria's eyes. Maria, we've worked together for many years. I understand your heart was in the right place, but rules exist for a reason. To let children go hungry? Maria asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Eduardo's posture stiffened further. Your insubordination only compounds the issue. This isn't about insubordination, Maria insisted, leaning forward. This is about basic human compassion. Tiago was sitting alone, holding his stomach. What was I supposed to do? Follow protocol, Eduardo replied. Submit a referral to Student Services. Allow the system to work as designed. Maria looked to Principal Vargas, hoping to find some understanding, but the woman's expression had hardened. I'm afraid this incident, combined with your current attitude, leaves me no choice. We're terminating your employment, effective immediately. The words hit Maria like a physical blow. Termination. After 15 years of dedication, of early, mornings and late nights grading papers, of spending her own meager salary on classroom supplies, all ended because she couldn't bear to see a child go hungry. You can't be serious, she whispered. Mr. Mendez will escort you to collect your personal belongings, Principal Vargas continued, her voice deliberately even. Your final paycheck will be processed according to standard procedures. Maria stood on unsteady legs. My students. A substitute will be arranged, Eduardo interjected. Please follow me. As they left the office, Maria caught a glimpse of Principal Vargas turning away, perhaps unable to witness the aftermath of her decision. The hallway now seemed alien and hostile, no longer a place of purpose, but the site of her humiliation. Eduardo marched her to her classroom, where her students looked up in surprise as she entered with the stern administrator. Class, please continue your reading, Maria managed to say. I need to step out for a moment. She gathered her few personal items, a framed photo of her children, a potted plant, a mug given to her by last year's class, all while Eduardo watched impassively. The task took less than 5 minutes, but each second felt like an eternity. When they emerged from the classroom, the bell had rung and students filled the hallway. Whispers followed them as Eduardo led Maria toward the exit, her small box of possessions clutched against her chest like a shield. Professora Maria, a small voice called. It was Tiago, his eyes wide with confusion. Where are you going? Maria opened her mouth to respond, but Eduardo stepped between them. Return to class, young man, this doesn't concern you. But it did concern him, Maria thought as she was marched past curious students and shocked colleagues. It concerned him more than anyone could possibly know. Outside, the grey sky matched her mood as she stood on the school steps, suddenly untethered. 15 years of purpose stripped away in a single moment, all because she couldn't turn her back on a hungry child. How would she tell her children? How would she pay next month's rent? The questions swirled in her mind like leaves caught in a storm drain as she began the long walk home, each step taking her further from the life she had known and toward an uncertain future. That evening, Maria stood in her small kitchen, staring at the nearly empty refrigerator. A half carton of milk, some wilting vegetables, and a small chunk of cheese were all that remained. Her final paycheck wouldn't arrive for another week, and even that wouldn't last long once rent was due. She closed the refrigerator door and leaned against it, pressing her forehead to the cool surface. The apartment was quiet for now, her children still at their after-school activities, unaware that their lives had just been upended. How would she tell them? What words could possibly soften the blow of Mama lost her job because she fed a hungry student? Maria pushed herself away from the refrigerator and moved to the small table that dominated their living space. Bills were stacked neatly in one corner: electricity, water, rent, school supplies. She had always managed to keep them at bay, even if just barely. Teaching hadn't paid well, but it had been steady. Now there was nothing. She heard the front door open, followed by the familiar sounds of her children's voices. Luisa, her eldest at 16, entered first, already talking about a school project. Behind her came the twins, Carlos and Sofia, 12 years old and inseparable, arguing good-naturedly about something that had happened during soccer practice. Maria quickly wiped her eyes and plastered on a smile. "How was school?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady. "Boring," Carlos declared, dropping his backpack on the floor. "But coach said I might start in the next game." "That's wonderful, meu amor," Maria said, ruffling his hair. "And you, Sofia, Luisa?" Sofia launched into a story about her art class, while Luisa rummaged through the refrigerator. The normalcy of the moment made Maria's chest ache. How many more such moments could she provide before everything fell apart? "Mama, there's hardly any food," Luisa said, turning with a small frown. At 16, she was perceptive, already shouldering more awareness of their financial situation than Maria would have wished. "I'll go shopping tomorrow," Maria promised, knowing it was a lie. "For tonight, we'll make do with what we have." She prepared a simple meal, stretching the ingredients as far as they would go. As they ate, her children chatted about their days, their dreams, their small triumphs and disappointments. Maria listened, committing each word to memory, afraid that such uncomplicated happiness might soon be a luxury they could no longer afford. After dinner, when the twins were occupied with homework, Luisa cornered her mother in the kitchen. "What's wrong?" she asked directly. "And don't say nothing. I know you, Mama." Maria looked at her daughter, so grown up, so perceptive. She deserved the truth, even if Maria wished to protect her from it. "I lost my job today," she said quietly. Luisa's eyes widened. "What? Why? You're the best teacher at that school." Maria briefly explained what had happened, watching as her daughter's expression shifted from shock to outrage. "That's not fair," Luisa exclaimed. "You were helping someone." "Life isn't always fair, minha filha," Maria said softly. "But we'll manage. I'll find another position. What can I do to help?" Luisa asked, her young face suddenly serious. The question brought fresh tears to Maria's eyes. At 16, Luisa should be concerned with friends and studies, not keeping a roof over their heads. But this was their reality now. "Just help with your siblings," Maria said, squeezing her daughter's hand. "And perhaps your weekend job at the cafe, maybe they would give you more hours." Luisa nodded solemnly. "I'll ask tomorrow." Later, after the children were in bed, Maria sat alone at the kitchen table with a stack of newspapers, circling job advertisements with a red pen. Teaching positions were scarce, especially mid-year, but she had to try. She had experience, excellent evaluations, a degree. Surely that would count for something. But as the night wore on and the circle of red marks grew, a creeping dread settled. In her stomach, what if no school would hire her? What if word spread about why she had been terminated? In the small educational community of their city, reputations traveled quickly. By dawn, Maria had a plan, or at least the beginnings of one. She would apply to every school in the region, from the prestigious private academies to the struggling public institutions in the poorest neighborhoods. Simultaneously, she would look for any work that could help them survive until a teaching position came through. Housekeeping, retail, food service, anything that would keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. As the first light of morning filtered through the thin curtains, Maria finally allowed herself to rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, her children slept safely in their beds. She had to believe that would continue to be true, no matter what sacrifices she had to make. The rejection letters began arriving within days. Some were formal and impersonal. "We regret to inform you that we have selected another candidate." Others were more direct. "Your qualifications are impressive, but we have concerns about your professional record." Maria kept them in a folder, tucked away where her children wouldn't find them. Each one was a physical reminder of how quickly a reputation could be destroyed. It didn't take long to confirm her fears. Word had spread about her dismissal, twisted and distorted with each retelling. Somehow her act of compassion had been transformed into a narrative about insubordination and poor judgment. Schools that had once expressed interest in her expertise now wouldn't even grant her an interview. By the end of the second week, Maria had expanded her search beyond teaching. She applied at shops, restaurants, offices, anywhere that might hire a woman in her 40s whose only professional experience was in education. These efforts yielded a few interviews, but no offers. Maria began to wonder if there was a sign on her forehead marking her as unemployable. Meanwhile, the bills continued to arrive with unrelenting regularity. The final paycheck from the school had covered rent for one more month, but after that, they would face eviction. The refrigerator grew barer, and Maria found herself calculating portions with mathematical precision, ensuring her children had enough while she subsisted on tea and bread crusts. Louisa had secured more hours at the cafe, contributing her small paycheck to the household funds with a maturity that broke Maria's heart. The twins remained largely unaware of the severity of their situation, though they had begun to notice the changes: simpler meals, no new clothes, their mother's increasing absence as she searched for work. It was Sophia who found Maria crying one evening, huddled at the kitchen table over a particularly cruel rejection letter that explicitly referenced her ethical lapse in judgment. "Mama?" Sophia's small voice pulled Maria from her despair. You okay?" Maria quickly wiped her tears. "Just tired, meu amor, nothing to worry about." Sophia, with the candor of a 12-year-old, didn't believe her. "Is it because you don't teach anymore? Because you miss your students?" "Partly," Maria admitted, pulling her daughter into a hug. "I do miss teaching very much." "Then why don't you go back?" Sophia asked simply. The innocent question pierced Maria's heart. How could she explain that it wasn't a choice? That doors had been closed to her, locks changed, bridges burned, all metaphors for the simple truth that nobody would hire her. "Sometimes, Sophia, we have to find new paths when the old ones are no longer available to us," she said carefully. "I'm looking for a new path now." Sophia considered this with the seriousness that children reserve for truly important matters. "When you find it, will you be happy again?" The question hung in the air between them. Maria wanted to offer reassurance, to promise that happiness was just around the corner, but she couldn't bear to add another lie to the growing pile of half-truths she had told her children. "I hope so," she said instead. "Now it's getting late. Go brush your teeth." After Sophia left, Maria returned to the rejection letter. In crisp, formal language, it advised her to seek employment outside of education, suggesting that her temperament might be better suited to other fields. The next morning, Maria woke before dawn and walked to the industrial district on the city's edge. She had heard that a cleaning service was hiring, no experience necessary. The work would be physically demanding, the hours long, the pay minimal. But there was something. After waiting in line for 3 hours, she was handed a form and told to return the following day. That evening, she prepared dinner with a small spark of hope. It wasn't teaching, but it was work. They might survive after all. Then Carlos came home with a ripped backpack and a note from his teacher. He needed new school supplies, specifically a scientific calculator for his math class. It was required, the note explained, and would cost approximately 80 reais. Maria stared at the figure, mentally calculating how many hours of cleaning toilets it would take to earn that amount. The spark of hope flickered and dimmed. Later, as she tucked the twins into bed, Carlos asked the question she had been dreading. "Mama, when are things going to get better?" Maria smoothed his hair back from his forehead, buying time to compose an answer. "We're going through a difficult time, but it won't last forever. Things will improve. We just need to be patient and help each other." "But why is this happening to us?" he persisted. "Did we do something wrong?" "No, meu filho," Maria said, firmly. "You've done nothing wrong. Sometimes life is challenging even when we've made the right choices, but we're together, and that's what matters most. The answer seemed to satisfy him, but as Maria turned out the light, she wondered if she was right. Had she made the right choice that day in the cafeteria? If she could go back knowing what she knew now, would she still buy that meal for Tiago? The question haunted her as she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. As much as the consequences terrified her, as much as she feared for her children's future, she couldn't imagine walking away from a hungry child. Some principles couldn't be compromised, even at great personal cost. With that thought still resonating, Maria finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. Her last conscious thought a prayer for strength to face whatever tomorrow might bring. The cleaning job was even harder than Maria had anticipated. Each day began at 4:30 a.m., when she would rise quietly, careful not to wake her children, and make the long walk to the bus stop. By 6 a.m., she would be on her knees, scrubbing floors in corporate offices, emptying trash bins, and cleaning bathrooms. Her supervisor, a harried woman with perpetually suspicious eyes, watched for any sign of slacking, any minute wasted. The work itself wasn't what broke Maria's spirit. She had never been afraid of hard labor. It was the invisibility that wore her down, the way people walked past her without acknowledgement, sometimes dropping more trash moments after she had cleaned an area. It was the stark contrast to her life as a teacher, where her words had mattered, where children had looked to her with respect and affection. Now she was just a shadow moving through the early morning hours, erasing evidence of others' existence. The pay was as minimal as expected. After bus fare and the small amount she set aside for Luisa to manage the household in her absence, there was barely enough to cover the most basic necessities. The calculator for Carlos remained an unattainable luxury. 3 weeks into this new routine, Maria's body began to protest. Her knees ached constantly from hours of scrubbing. Her hands, once soft from handling books and papers, were now raw, and cracked from harsh cleaning chemicals. Each night she soaked them in warm water, trying to ease the pain enough to allow sleep. Luisa noticed, of course. She had taken on the role of second parent with a determination that made Maria both proud and heartbroken. One evening, as Maria treated a particularly painful crack in her palm, Luisa sat beside her with a small jar of cream. "From the cafe," she explained, carefully applying the balm to her mother's hands. "The cook uses it for burns." Maria winced, slightly at the initial sting, then relaxed as the pain began to subside. "Obrigada, minha filha." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Luisa spoke again. "Mama, I've been thinking, if I left school now I could work full-time. The cafe manager said—" "No," Maria interrupted, her voice firm despite her exhaustion. "Absolutely not." "But Mama, your education is not negotiable, Luisa," Maria said, turning to face her daughter directly. "It is the one thing I will not compromise on, not for any amount of money. Your future depends on your education." "But what about now?" Luisa asked, frustration edging into her voice. "What about paying the rent next month? What about Carlos's calculator? What about food?" The questions landed like blows, each one highlighting Maria's inadequacy, her failure to provide. She took a deep breath, fighting back tears. "We will manage," she said, infusing her voice with a confidence she didn't feel. "The rent will be paid. Carlos will get his calculator. We will not go hungry." "How?" Luisa demanded. Maria had no answer that wouldn't sound like a false promise. Instead, she gently pulled her hands away and stood up. "It's late. You should get some rest. You have school tomorrow." Luisa looked as though she wanted to argue further, but something in Maria's expression stopped her. With a small nod, she retreated to the bedroom she shared with Sophia. Once alone, Maria allowed her shoulders to slump. How could she keep these promises? The cleaning job barely covered food and utilities. She had already pawned her wedding ring, the last remnant of a marriage that had dissolved years ago when her husband decided family life was too constraining. There was nothing left to sell, no additional hours she could work without collapsing from exhaustion. The next day brought a new complication. As Maria cleaned the executive floor of a financial company, she overheard a conversation about layoffs at the cleaning service. The company was cutting costs, and the lowest-paid workers would be the first to go. By the end of the week, her fears were confirmed. She was called into a small windowless office, where her supervisor informed her that her services would no longer be required. No explanation was given beyond restructuring, and her final paycheck was pushed across the desk with clinical efficiency. Maria left the building in a daze, the small envelope containing her pay clutched tightly in her hand. It wasn't enough. It wouldn't cover rent, food, and Carlos's calculator. It wouldn't even cover rent alone. That afternoon, instead of going home, Maria wandered through the downtown area, looking for help-wanted signs in shop windows. She inquired at restaurants, at boutiques, at convenience stores. Each time, the answer was the same. No positions available, or nothing for someone with her limited experience. As dusk fell, she found herself near the recycling center, where informal waste pickers, catadors, brought their daily collections. Men and women sorted through mountains of cardboard, plastic, and metal, their hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the squalid conditions. A woman about Maria's age noticed her watching and approached. "Looking for work?" she asked. So without preamble. Maria nodded, too exhausted for pride. The woman gestured toward a collection of carts leaning against the fence. "You'll need a cart. There's a guy who rents them on Rua Silva, 3 blocks west, 20 reais a day, returned. If the cart comes back undamaged." "And then?" Maria asked. "Then you walk," the woman said with a shrug. "Cardboard is best. Lighter than metal, pays better than plastic. Commercial areas after closing time. Rich neighborhoods on garbage day. Stay away from Setor Norte, that's Miguel's territory, and he doesn't share." Maria absorbed the information, mentally calculating routes, distances, potential earnings. It wasn't cleaning corporate offices, and it certainly wasn't teaching, but it was something. Something that might keep her children fed, might keep a roof over their heads for a little longer. "Obrigada," she said to the woman, who nodded once before returning to her sorting. That night, Maria came home with a rented cart and explained to her children that she had found a new opportunity. She didn't use the words waste picker or catadora. Instead, she talked about recyclable materials collection and environmental sustainability. The twins accepted the explanation readily. Enough. But Luisa's eyes reflected understanding and concern. Later, as Maria prepared for her first night of collecting, Luisa helped her assemble suitable clothing, layers for warmth, gloves to protect her hands, sturdy shoes for walking. "I could come with you," Luisa offered. "After school, before my cafe shift." Maria shook her head. "Your job is to study and help with your siblings. This is my responsibility." "But Mama—" "No arguments, Luisa," Maria said, her tone gentle but firm. "This is temporary, a step on the path, not the destination." As she set out that night, pushing the empty cart through darkened streets, Maria repeated those words to herself like a mantra. Temporary, not the destination. Just a step on the path. But as the weeks passed and the cart became a familiar extension of her body, as she learned which dumpsters yielded the best materials and which security guards would look the other way, Maria began to wonder if she was lying to herself. Perhaps this wasn't just a step. Perhaps this was the destination, the culmination of a journey that had begun with a simple act of kindness and ended with her sifting through other people's discards under the cold light of street lamps. If so, she thought as she loaded another stack of cardboard onto her cart, what did that say about the world they lived in? What lesson was being taught? 3 months into her new life as a catadora, Maria developed a routine that allowed her to maximize her earnings while still being present for her children. She would collect materials from midnight until dawn, return home to prepare breakfast and see the children off to school, sleep for a few hours, then sort and deliver her findings to the recycling center before picking up the twins from school. The work was grueling, and the income barely sufficient, but they were surviving. Rent was paid, if sometimes late. Food was simple but available. Carlos had received his calculator, a second-hand model found by one of Maria's fellow waste pickers, who had heard about her son's need. They had adjusted to their new circumstances with a resilience that made Maria fiercely proud. Luisa continued to work at the cafe while maintaining excellent grades. The twins had taken on more household responsibilities without complaint. They ate less, wore clothes until they were threadbare, and never asked for the small luxuries that their peers took for granted. But Maria could see the toll their situation was taking. Sophia, once exuberant, had grown quieter, more withdrawn. Carlos's teachers reported that he seemed distracted in class. And Luisa, mature, responsible Luisa, had dark circles under her, eyes from juggling too many responsibilities for a 16-year-old. Maria herself was a shadow of the woman she had been. Her clothes hung loosely on her frame, her once vibrant curls were often hidden under a scarf, and the spark that had animated her classroom presentations had dimmed to barely a flicker. Yet they persevered day by day, week by week, clinging to the hope that somehow things would improve. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, addressed to the Oliveira family, in an elegant script that seemed out of place among the bills and advertisements. Maria opened it after the children had left for school, curious but also wary of unexpected communications. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream paper. The message was brief. Dear Señoras y Señores Oliveira, I represent a client who wishes to remain anonymous, but who has taken an interest in your family's welfare. My client has instructed me to inform you that a position has become available that may be suitable for Señora Maria Oliveira, given her background in education. If Señora Oliveira is interested in discussing this opportunity, please contact me at the number below to arrange a meeting. Respectfully, Dr. Paulo Mendes, attorney at Law A business card, was paper-clipped to the letter, bearing the name of a prestigious law firm in the city center. Maria read the letter 3 times, her suspicion growing with each reading. Anonymous. Clients. Mysterious job opportunities. It seemed more like a scam than a legitimate offer, yet the law firm was real. She recognized the name from advertisements, and the letter itself, with its heavy paper and professional appearance, didn't have the hallmarks of the usual schemes targeting desperate people. She placed the letter on the table and went about her day, trying to push it from her mind. There were more immediate concerns. Sophia had outgrown her school shoes, the electricity bill was overdue, and Maria's cart needed repairs. But the letter nagged at her, a persistent whisper of possibility. What if it was real? What if someone had indeed recognized her qualifications and wanted to offer her a proper job? What did she have to lose by making a phone call? That evening, after dinner, Maria retrieved the letter from its hiding place. The children were busy with homework, giving her a moment of privacy. With trembling fingers, she dialed the number on the business card. Her crisp, professional voice answered, Escritorio de Advocacia Mendes y Asociados. I would like to speak with Dr. Paulo Mendes, Maria said, her voice unexpectedly hoarse. My name is Maria Oliveira. I received a letter from him today. There was a brief pause, the sound of pages turning. Ah, yes, Señora Oliveira. Dr. Mendes is expecting your call. One moment, please. The line clicked, and soft classical music played while Maria waited, her heart pounding. This was real, then, not a scam or a cruel joke. Señora Oliveira, a deep, authoritative voice replaced the music. Thank you for calling. I was hoping to hear from you. Your letter mentioned a job opportunity, Maria said, trying to keep her voice steady. I would like to know more. Of course, Dr. Mendes replied. However, my client prefers to discuss the details in person. Would you be available to meet tomorrow at my office? Say 10 in the morning. Maria quickly calculated. 10 would give her time to deliver her night's collection to the recycling center and still make it to the city center for the meeting. Yes, I can be there. Excellent, Dr. Mendes said. I'll have my secretary expect you. Until tomorrow, then. After hanging up, Maria sat motionless, the phone still clutched in her hand. A real job interview, her first in months. Hope, that dangerous emotion she had tried so hard to suppress, fluttered to life in her chest. She spent the next several hours preparing. Her better clothes were washed and ironed. Her hair was washed and arranged neatly. She even applied a touch of the lipstick she had saved for special occasions, though it felt strange on lips that had become accustomed to going bare. Louisa watched these preparations with cautious optimism. "Do you know what kind of job it is?" she asked as Maria tried to decide between her only 2 presentable blouses. "No," Maria admitted. "The letter was very vague, but it mentioned my background in education, so perhaps it's something related to teaching." "Maybe it's a private tutoring position," Louisa suggested, passing Maria the blue blouse that complemented her eyes. For a wealthy family. The possibility hadn't occurred to Maria. Private tutoring might allow her to use her skills without confronting the barrier of her tarnished reputation in the school system. "Perhaps," she agreed, not wanting to invest too heavily in anyone. Scenario. That night, despite her exhaustion, Maria found sleep elusive. Her mind raced with questions, possibilities, and inevitably fears. What if this was all an elaborate setup? What if she was being lured into something illegal or dangerous? What if she was setting herself up for another devastating disappointment? By dawn, she had convinced herself that nothing would come of the meeting, that it was best to expect the worst to protect herself from further heartbreak. Yet as she dressed in her carefully prepared outfit, she couldn't quite extinguish the small flame of hope that had taken root. The law office was housed in a gleaming high-rise in the financial district, its lobby all marble and glass. Maria felt conspicuously out of place as she approached the reception desk, aware of the contrast between her worn shoes and the polished floor, between her carefully mended blouse and the receptionist's designer suit. "Maria Oliveira," she said, quietly. "I have an appointment with Dr. Mendez." The receptionist checked her computer, then nodded. "Please take the elevator to the 15th floor. Dr. Mendez's secretary will meet you there." The elevator ride was brief, but disorienting. Maria watched the numbers climb, feeling as though she was ascending into a world that had long ago ceased to be accessible to her. When the doors opened, a poised woman in a tailored dress greeted her. "Señora Oliveira, this way please. Dr. Mendez is ready for you." As Maria followed her through a corridor lined with artwork that probably cost more than she had earned in the past year, she steeled herself against disappointment. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, she would face it with dignity. The secretary opened a heavy wooden door and gestured for Maria to enter. "Señora Maria Oliveira," she announced before withdrawing, closing the door behind her. The office was spacious and elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Behind a massive desk sat a distinguished man in his 60s, his silver hair perfectly groomed, his suit impeccably tailored. Dr. Paulo Mendez rose as Maria entered, extending his hand in greeting. "Señora Oliveira, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." He gestured to a comfortable chair opposite his desk. Maria sat smoothing her skirt nervously. "Your letter mentioned a job opportunity related to my background in education." "Indeed," Dr. Mendez said, returning to his own seat. "But first, I believe some context would be helpful." He opened a leather portfolio on his desk. "You taught at Escola Nova Esperanza for 15 years, correct? With exemplary reviews and a reputation for dedication to your students." Maria nodded, wondering how he had obtained this information and where this conversation was leading. "And you were dismissed approximately 4 months ago for providing a meal to a student in need, contrary to school policy." The blunt statement of facts made Maria flinch. "Yes," she admitted quietly, though the official reason given was insubordination. Dr. Mendez made a dismissive gesture, a technicality used to justify an unconscionable decision. He closed the portfolio and leaned forward slightly. "My client has been following your situation with great interest, Señora Oliveira. He was distressed to learn of the circumstances of your dismissal and your subsequent difficulties in finding employment." "Your client knows about my current situation?" Maria asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. Who was this mysterious person who had been monitoring her life? "My client knows that a grave injustice was done to you," Dr. Mendez replied carefully, "and he wishes to rectify it if you are willing." "How?" "My client has recently established an educational foundation focused on providing resources to underprivileged children. He requires someone with experience, compassion, and unwavering principles to serve as the Foundation's director. Someone precisely like you, Senora Oliveira. Maria blinked, certain she had misheard. Director, but I'm a classroom teacher. I have no experience running a foundation. You have 15 years of experience in education, a profound understanding of children's needs, and a moral compass that does not waver even at personal cost, Dr. Mendez countered. My client believes these qualities are far more valuable than administrative experience, which can be acquired. May I ask who your client is? Maria ventured. He prefers to remain anonymous for now, Dr. Mendez said, but I can assure you, his intentions are sincere. The position offers a competitive salary, comprehensive benefits, and the opportunity to make a real difference in the lives of children who need advocates like yourself. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a detailed job description and a compensation package that made Maria's breath catch. The salary was triple what she had earned as a teacher, with health insurance, educational subsidies for her children, and a housing allowance that would allow them to move to a better apartment. It seemed too good to be true, because this good didn't happen to people like her, people who had been discarded and forgotten, people who pushed carts through the night collecting cardboard just to feed their children. Why me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. There must be hundreds of qualified educators without complicated histories. Dr. Mendez studied her for a moment before responding. My client believes that what some see as a complicated history is actually your greatest qualification. You demonstrated, at significant personal cost, that your commitment to children's welfare transcends rules and self-interest. That is precisely the ethos the Foundation aims to embody. Maria looked down at the folder in her hands, at the opportunity. It represented not just financial security, but a return to purpose, to dignity, to making a difference. May I have some time to consider? She asked. Of course, Dr. Mendez replied. The Foundation's launch is scheduled for next month, so we would need your decision within the week. In the meantime, this might help inform your choice. He handed her another folder, this one containing a preliminary outline of the Foundation's missions and programs. As Maria left the office building, the weight of the folders in her hands seemed both insignificant and immense. The sun was bright overhead, the city buzzing with its usual midday energy, but she moved through it all in a daze, her mind whirling with possibilities. Could this be real? After months of closed doors and dwindling hope, could such an opportunity truly be offered to her? And if so, who was behind it? What unknown benefactor had taken such an interest in her welfare? These questions occupied her thoughts as she made her way home. The folders clutched tightly against her chest, like talismans against the harsh realities that had become her daily existence. 3 days after her meeting with Dr. Mendez, Maria was no closer to a decision. The opportunity seemed perfect, almost suspiciously so. Yet her instincts, honed by years of assessing students' true needs beneath their presented problems, told her there was something genuine at its core. She had discussed it with Luisa, whose initial skepticism had gradually given way to cautious excitement. The twins, when told about the possibility of a new job helping children, had responded with uncomprehending enthusiasm, too young to fully grasp the transformative potential of this change. On the 4th evening, as Maria was preparing a simple dinner of rice and beans, a knock came at their apartment door. The sound was so unexpected that everyone froze. They rarely received visitors. Their current circumstances had gradually isolated them from the social connections they once maintained. "I'll get it," Luisa said, moving toward the door while Maria quickly wiped her hands on a dishcloth. The door opened to reveal a tall man in a well-cut suit, his confident posture suggesting someone accustomed to commanding attention. For a moment, Maria didn't recognize him. He was so far removed from their current context that her mind struggled to place him. Then, as their eyes met, recognition dawned with the force of an electric shock. "Professora Maria," the man said, his smile revealing a familiar gap between his front teeth. "It's been a long time." "Tiago," Maria whispered, hardly believing her eyes. It was indeed Tiago Santos, the boy from the cafeteria, now a grown man who stood in her doorway with the bearing of someone who had navigated the world successfully. The skinny, hungry child with downcast eyes had become a confident adult whose gaze met hers steadily. "May I come in?" he asked. Louisa looked to her mother, who nodded, still too stunned to speak. Tiago stepped into their small apartment, seeming larger than life against their worn furniture and peeling paint. "You must be Louisa," he said, extending his hand to Maria's daughter. "And these are the twins, Carlos and Sofia." The children nodded, staring at this stranger who knew their names. Maria finally found her voice. "How did you find us?" Tiago's expression turned serious. "Finding you wasn't easy, Professora. After I heard what happened at the school, I tried to contact you, but you had already moved. It took some time and resources to locate you." "Why?" Maria asked, still struggling to process his presence in their home. "Because I owe you a debt I can never fully repay," Tiago replied simply. "May we sit? I have a story to tell you. One you should have heard years ago." Maria gestured to their small dining table, and they all took seats. The twins watched with undisguised curiosity, while Louisa maintained a protective wariness. Maria simply waited, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "The day you bought me lunch," Tiago began, "was not just any day for me. That morning, my mother had been hospitalized. Again. My father had left years before. There was no food at home, no money. I had been walking to school because we couldn't afford bus fare. I was at the end of my endurance, physically and emotionally." He paused, his composure momentarily slipping to reveal the shadow of that desperate boy. "I had decided that day would be my last at school. I was going to drop out, try to find work, any work, to help support my mother and myself. I had reached a breaking point." Maria remembered the hollow look in his eyes that day, recognized now as something deeper than mere hunger. "I didn't know," she said softly. "How could you?" Tiago replied. "But when you bought me that meal, when you showed me that someone, anyone, noticed and cared, it changed something in me. It gave me just enough hope to continue." He took a deep breath. "I stayed in school. I worked evenings and weekends, but I stayed. I studied hard because I remembered how you always encouraged students to see education as their path forward. When I learned of your dismissal, I was already in my final year. I wanted to find you, to tell you what your kindness had meant, but no one would tell me where you had gone." "So what happened next?" Louisa asked, her initial wariness softening. "I finished school with honors," Tiago continued. "I earned a scholarship to university, business administration. I worked throughout my studies and eventually started a small import company. It grew. I was fortunate, but I never forgot where I came from or the people who helped me along the way, especially you, Professora." He turned to Maria, his expression solemn. "When I finally located you a month ago and learned of your circumstances, I knew I had to help. Not out of pity, but because you deserve far better than what life has dealt you." The pieces suddenly aligned in Maria's mind. "The foundation. It's yours," Tiago nodded. "My way of honoring what you did for me and ensuring that other children receive the support they need. The position is genuine, Professora. I want you to lead this foundation because there is no one better qualified, no one who better embodies the principles it stands for." Maria looked around at her children's awestruck faces, at her humble home that had witnessed so much struggle, at this man who had once been a hungry boy in her cafeteria. The enormity of the moment overwhelmed her, and tears spilled onto her cheeks. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Tiago replied simply. "Say you'll help me create something meaningful from what began as a simple act of kindness." Sofia, who had been quiet throughout the exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Does this mean Mama won't have to collect cardboard anymore? That she can be a teacher again?" Tiago looked to Maria for permission before answering. When she nodded, he turned to Sofia with a gentle smile. "Your mother will be much more than a teacher. She'll be helping many children, just as she once helped me." Carlos, pragmatic as always, asked, "Will we have to move?" "Only if you want to," Tiago assured him. "The housing allowance would allow you to find a larger apartment in a better neighborhood, but that decision would be entirely up to your mother." Maria looked at Louisa, seeking her eldest child's reaction. Luisa's eyes shone with a mixture of tears and hope. "Mama," she said softly, "I think this is the new path you were looking for." The simple statement broke the last of Maria's hesitation. How long had they struggled, just barely surviving? How many nights had she lain awake, wondering if there was any way forward, any chance for the life her children deserved? "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Yes, I would be honored to lead your foundation, Tiago." The he. Atmosphere in the small apartment transformed instantaneously. The twins cheered. Luisa hugged her mother tightly, and Tiago's face broke into a wide, gap-toothed smile that momentarily revealed the boy he had been. "Excelente," he exclaimed, extracting a slim folder from his briefcase. "I've brought the contracts for your review. Take your time reading them. My lawyer, Dr. Mendes, whom you've met, will be available to answer any questions." As Maria accepted the folder, reality began to settle around her. This wasn't a dream or a cruel joke. This was real, a genuine opportunity, born from a long ago. Kindness returned now when she needed it most. "There's one more thing," Tiago said, his expression growing serious again. "I'd like to make a formal announcement about the foundation and your appointment at a press event next week. Given the circumstances of your dismissal from Escola Nova Esperanza, this might generate some attention. Are you prepared for that?" Maria considered the question carefully. For months she had lived in the shadows, invisible to the world that had once valued her contributions. The prospect of stepping back into public view, of potentially facing those who had cast her aside, was daunting. But in that moment, sitting with her children, and this man whose life she had changed with a simple meal, Maria felt something long dormant unfurl within her chest: courage, purpose, conviction. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm ready." Tiago's smile returned, wider than before. "I hoped you would say that. Now I've taken enough of your evening. We can discuss the details tomorrow, perhaps over lunch. I know an excellent restaurant near the Foundation's new offices." As he rose to leave, Tiago reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, which he placed on the table. It was a cafeteria token, the same kind Maria had used to purchase his meal all those years ago. "I kept this," he said quietly, "to remind me that sometimes the smallest actions have the greatest impact." After Tiago departed, the Oliveira family sat in stunned silence, the cafeteria token gleaming dully under their kitchen light. Then, as if a dam had broken, they began to talk all at once, about the foundation, about moving possibilities, about a future that suddenly seemed bright with promise, instead of shadowed by desperation. That night, for the first time in months, Maria slept deeply and dreamlessly, unburdened by the weight of uncertainty that had become her constant companion. In the morning, she would begin a new chapter, not just for herself, but for her children, and for countless others who might benefit from the Foundation's work. As dawn broke, Maria stood at her small window, watching the city awaken. Somewhere in those streets was the path forward. Not the path she had envisioned, but perhaps the one she had been meant to find all along. The Novo Começo Foundation opened its doors on a sunny Tuesday morning, housed in a renovated historic building in one of the city's oldest neighborhoods. The space was elegant yet welcoming, with bright classrooms, a well-stocked library, and a cafeteria where, Tiago had insisted, no child would ever be turned away hungry. Maria's office overlooked a small courtyard where children would soon gather for outdoor activities. On her desk sat a framed photograph of her with her children, taken at the Foundation's private opening celebration the previous evening. There, smiles, genuine, unguarded happiness that had been too rare in recent months, reminded her of why this opportunity meant so much. The Foundation's mission was ambitious: to provide educational support, nutritional assistance, and mentorship to children from the city's most underserved communities. The programs ranged from after-school tutoring to weekend enrichment activities, summer camps to parent education workshops. In designing these initiatives, Tiago had given Maria complete autonomy, trusting her expertise and instincts implicitly. "Nervous?" Luisa asked, poking her head into the office. She had taken a position as a part-time administrative assistant at the foundation, balancing the work with her final year of high school. Maria adjusted the stack of folders on her desk. "A little," she admitted. "It's been a long time since I've been responsible for anything beyond our immediate survival." Luisa crossed the office and straightened her mother's collar affectionately. "You've always been responsible for more than that. You just have the resources to match your vision now." The observation was so unexpectedly mature that Maria found herself momentarily speechless. When had her daughter developed such wisdom? Perhaps during those long months when they had all been forced to grow in ways they hadn't anticipated. A gentle knock at the door interrupted the moment. It was Helena, the foundation's newly hired receptionist. "Senora Oliveira, the first families are arriving." Maria took a deep breath and smoothed her new dress, a simple but elegant garment that Tiago had insisted on adding to the startup costs of her employment. "Thank you, Helena. I'll be right there." In the foyer, a small group of parents and children waited nervously, their expressions a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Maria recognized that look. It was the same one she had worn in Dr. Mendes's office, the look of people afraid to believe that something good might truly be happening to them. "Bom dia," she greeted them warmly. "Welcome to Novo Começo. I'm Maria Oliveira, the director. We're so happy you're here." As she led them on a tour of the facilities, explaining the programs and answering questions, Maria felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged, not just teaching, but creating a space where education was accessible to all, where kindness was policy, not exception. By midday, the foundation was buzzing with activity. Children explored the library, parents filled out enrollment forms, and staff members established the beginnings of what Maria hoped would become meaningful relationships with each family. Shortly before lunch, Tiago arrived with Dr. Mendes. They observed the activity from the edge of the room, Tiago's expression growing increasingly satisfied. "It's everything I hoped for," he told Maria when she joined them. "You've brought it to life." "We've only just begun," she reminded him, but couldn't suppress her own smile. The energy in the building was palpable, a sense of possibility that had been absent from her life for too long. Dr. Mendes excused himself for a meeting, leaving Maria and Tiago to continue their observation. "There's something I should tell you," Tiago said after a moment, "about the press event tomorrow." Maria tensed slightly. The public announcement of the foundation had been scheduled for the following day, with local media invited to cover the story. "Is there a problem?" "Not a problem exactly," Tiago hedged, "but I've learned that your former school's administration plans to send a representative. Apparently they're concerned about potential public relations issues." Maria's stomach knotted. She hadn't spoken to anyone from Escola Nova Esperança since her dismissal. The thought of facing them now in this new context sent a wave of anxiety through her. "Who?" she asked, her voice tighter than she intended. "Principal Vargas," Tiago replied, "and possibly Eduardo Mendes." The names alone caused Maria's breath to catch. Principal Vargas, who had delivered the news of her termination. Eduardo Mendes, whose rigid adherence to rules had cost Maria her career and nearly her family's survival. "I see," she managed. "And what do they want?" Tiago's expression hardened slightly, a glimpse of the shrewd businessman beneath his generally amiable demeanor. "Officially to extend their congratulations on your new position. Unofficially, I suspect they're concerned about how your story might reflect on them once it becomes public." The irony wasn't lost on Maria. The same administration that had cast her aside without a second thought was now worried about appearances. "And what do you think I should do?" "That's entirely up to you," Tiago replied. "You can refuse to speak with them. You can accept their congratulations graciously and move on. Or you can use the opportunity to say whatever you feel needs to be said." Maria considered the options carefully. A year ago, even 6 months ago, she might have chosen avoidance, too worn down by struggle to face another confrontation. But now, standing in the foundation that represented a new beginning for her, and potentially for hundreds of children, she felt a different response forming. "I'll speak with them," she decided. "After all, we're colleagues in education, aren't we?" Tiago's smile was knowing. Indeed you are, though I'd say your approaches differ significantly. As they walked toward the cafeteria, where lunch was being served to the visiting families, Maria felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. I still can't quite believe this is happening, she admitted. That one small action could lead to all of this. Tiago stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. It wasn't small to me, Professora. You were the first adult who showed me that someone cared whether I ate or went hungry. That changed everything. The simple statement hung in the air between them, a testament to how profoundly lives could be altered by moments of compassion. Maria thought of all the children who would pass through these doors in the coming years, all the moments of kindness that might ripple outward in ways no one could predict. Shall we join them for lunch? Tiago suggested, gesturing toward the cafeteria where children and parents were already gathering. I've been told the food is excellent. Who am I to argue? With the founder, Maria replied with a small smile. As they entered the cafeteria, she noticed a small boy sitting alone at one of the tables, his shoulders hunched in a posture she recognized all too well. Without thinking, Maria diverted from Tiago's side and approached the child. Is this seat taken? She asked gently. When the boy shook his head, she sat beside him. I'm Maria. What's your name? Pedro, the boy mumbled, eyes fixed on the empty space before him. Well, Pedro, lunch will be served soon. Are you hungry? The boy nodded, almost imperceptibly. Good, Maria said with a warm smile. Me too. And you know what? At Novo Começo, nobody goes hungry. That's our most important rule. Pedro looked up at her then, his expression cautious, but hopeful. It was a beginning. A small one, perhaps, but Maria had learned that beginnings didn't need to be grand to be significant. Across the room, Tiago watched the interaction with a knowing smile. The circle was complete. What had once been done for him was now being done for others, multiplied and amplified through the foundation that bore the perfect name, New Beginning. The day of the press announcement dawned clear and bright. Maria arrived at the foundation early, wanting time to prepare herself mentally for the public scrutiny that would soon follow. She had chosen her outfit carefully, professional but not ostentatious, a blue dress that Luisa assured her projected both confidence and approachability. The foundation's main reception area had been transformed for the occasion. Chairs were arranged in neat rows for the attending journalists and guests. A podium bearing the Novo Começo logo stood at the front, with a backdrop displaying photos of the programs already in progress. As Maria surveyed the space, she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she found Tiago watching her with an expression of quiet pride. Ready? He asked. As ready as I'll ever be, she replied. Though I'll admit, speaking to the press wasn't part of my teaching curriculum. Tiago laughed. Just speak from your heart. That's where the best words come from. Over the next hour, the room gradually filled. Journalists from local newspapers and television stations set up their equipment. Representatives from community, organizations and educational institutions arrived in groups of 2s and 3s. Maria greeted each one, maintaining a composure that belied her inner nervousness. Then, just 15 minutes before the scheduled start, they arrived. Principal Vargas entered first, her rigid posture and perfectly coiffed grey hair unchanged from Maria's memory. Behind her came Eduardo Mendez, his clipboard replaced by a leather portfolio, but his expression still coolly evaluative. Maria felt Luisa stiffen beside her. Those are the ones who fired you? Her daughter whispered, indignation evident in her tone. Yes, Maria confirmed quietly, but today isn't about the past. It's about Novo Começo. With a reassuring squeeze of Luisa's arm, Maria approached her former employers. Principal Vargas, Mr. Mendez, thank you for coming. Principal Vargas appeared momentarily taken aback by the direct greeting. Maria, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Congratulations on your new position. Thank you, Maria replied simply. It's a wonderful opportunity to continue serving our community's children. Eduardo cleared his throat. We were quite surprised to receive the invitation, given the circumstances of your departure from Escola Nova Esperanza. The implied question hung in the air. Why invite the people who had fired you? Maria had asked herself the same thing when reviewing the guest list with Tiago. His answer had been simple. Because this foundation exists to build bridges, not walls. Novo Começo is about new beginnings, Maria explained. That includes moving forward from difficult pasts. Besides, we all share a commitment to children's education, don't we? Even if our methods sometimes differ. Eduardo's lips thinned at the subtle reference to their disagreement, but Principal Vargas nodded slowly. Indeed. Well, we look forward to hearing about your vision. As they moved away to find seats, Tiago appeared at Maria's side. Smooth, he murmured. Much more diplomatic than I might have been in your position. Maria watched her former employers settle into chairs near the back of the room. They're not the villains in this story, Tiago. They were doing what they thought was right, enforcing the rules they were given. And yet their rules would have let a child go hungry, Tiago pointed out. Yes, Maria acknowledged, and that's why we're here today, to create a different approach. At precisely 10 o'clock, Dr. Mendez stepped to the podium to begin the proceedings. He welcomed the attendees and provided a brief overview of the Foundation's legal structure before introducing Tiago as the founder and primary benefactor. Tiago's speech was brief but powerful. He spoke about growing up in poverty, about the challenges faced by children in similar circumstances, and about the transformative power of education combined with compassion. He did not directly reference Maria's act of kindness toward him, having agreed that this part of the story would be hers to tell if she chose. And now, Tiago concluded, I am honored to introduce the woman who will lead Novo Começo into the future. A dedicated educator with 15 years of classroom experience, a mother of 3, and a person whose moral compass has never wavered, even in the face of significant personal cost. Please welcome our Executive Director, Maria Oliveira. The applause that followed was polite but curious. Most of the attendees knew little about Maria beyond what had been included in the press materials. Her teaching experience, her educational philosophy, her vision for the Foundation. They were here to learn more. As Maria took her place at the podium, she scanned the room. Her children sat in the front row, their faces shining with pride. Behind them were journalists with pens poised over notebooks. And in the back, Principal Vargas and Eduardo Mendez watched with expressions that mingled skepticism with something else, perhaps concern about what she might say about them. Maria had prepared remarks about the Foundation's mission, its programs, its goals for the coming year. But standing there, feeling the weight of all those expectant gazes, she made a spontaneous decision to begin differently. 4 months ago, she said clearly, I was fired from my teaching position for buying lunch for a hungry student. A murmur ran through the room. In the back, Principal Vargas shifted uncomfortably. It was against school policy, Maria continued, a policy designed to ensure fairness and proper procedure. I understood the reasoning behind the rule, but in that moment, faced with a child in need, I made a choice based on compassion rather than compliance. She paused, allowing the statement to settle over the audience. That choice had consequences. I lost my job. For months, my family struggled to survive. I worked as a cleaner, as a waste picker collecting cardboard, as anything that would keep food on our table and a roof over our heads. The journalists were writing furiously now. This was not the standard non-profit launch they had expected. I'm not telling you this to assign blame or seek sympathy, Maria continued. I'm telling you because it illustrates the core philosophy of Novo Começo. We believe that compassion must be at the center of education. We believe that rules and procedures, while necessary, should serve people, not the other way around. Maria glanced toward Tiago, who nodded encouragement. What I didn't know when I bought that lunch, what I couldn't have known, was that the student I helped would one day return to help me, that he would succeed against tremendous odds and create this foundation to ensure that other children receive the support they need to thrive. A ripple of realization moved through the room, as attention shifted to Tiago, who sat with a quiet smile, allowing Maria to tell their story her way. Senor Santos could have simply offered me a job. When he learned of my circumstances, that alone would have been immensely generous. Instead, he created something much larger, a foundation that will serve hundreds of children, that will embody the principle that no act of kindness is ever wasted, that will transform a moment of compassion into a legacy of support. Maria. Then transitioned to the prepared remarks about the Foundation's specific programs and initiatives. As she spoke, she noticed Principal Vargas leaning toward Eduardo, whispering something that caused his rigid posture to soften slightly. By the time Maria concluded her speech and invited questions from the press, the atmosphere in the room had transformed. What had begun as a standard non-profit announcement had become a compelling human interest story, the kind that resonated beyond facts and figures. The first question came from a young reporter in the third row. Senora Oliveira, do you harbor resentment toward Escola Nova Esperanza for your dismissal? Maria considered the question carefully. Resentment serves no purpose, she finally replied. What happened was painful for my family and me, but it led to this moment, to this foundation. If my experience can help create a more compassionate, educational approach for children in need, then perhaps it was worth the difficulties we endured. From the back of the room, Principal Vargas raised her hand, an unexpected development that caused a small stir among the journalists. Maria acknowledged her with a nod. This is not so much a question as a statement, Principal Vargas said, rising to her feet. As the principal of Escola Nova Esperanza, I want to acknowledge that while we acted according to our established policies, there is room for reflection on whether those policies truly serve our educational mission. The admission, modest as it was, clearly cost the proud woman considerable effort. Maria recognized it as the closest thing to an apology she was likely to receive. Thank you, Principal Vargas, she replied sincerely. Novo Começo would welcome collaboration with Escola Nova Esperanza and all educational institutions in our community. After all, we share the same fundamental goal, the well-being and development of our children. The exchange created a perfect closing note for the formal presentation. As the event transitioned to an informal reception, journalists clustered around Maria and Tiago, eager for more details about their intertwined stories. Principal Vargas and Eduardo Mendez remained briefly, somewhat awkwardly accepting refreshments, before making a discreet exit. As Maria watched them leave, Luisa appeared at her side. They didn't even really apologize, her daughter observed, indignation still evident in her tone. Perhaps not in words, Maria agreed. But they came, they listened. They may even reconsider some of their policies. That's a beginning. Luisa considered this, her expression thoughtful. Is that enough? For now, Maria replied, watching. As a group of children, the Foundation's first enrollees, demonstrated an art project for some of the guests. We have more important things to focus on. The rest of the day passed in a blur of interviews, conversations, and planning sessions. By evening, when Maria finally returned home with her children, she was exhausted but fulfilled in a way she hadn't experienced in months. As she prepared a simple dinner, no longer from desperate necessity but from pleasant routine, Sophia approached with a newspaper one of the journalists had left behind. "Mama, look," she said, pointing to a headline. "From dismissal to director, teacher's act of kindness comes full circle." Below was a photograph of Maria and Tiago standing together in front of the Foundation's sign, both smiling. Maria stared at the image for a long moment. There was her face, the same face that had once gazed back at her from a mirror each morning with worry and fear, now transformed by purpose and hope. Beside her stood Tiago, no longer the hungry boy from the cafeteria, but a successful man, whose generosity had changed her family's trajectory. "Is that us in the newspaper?" Carlos asked, peering over her shoulder. "Yes," Maria confirmed, her voice soft with wonder. "That's us. Does this mean we're famous?" he asked with the guileless enthusiasm of a 12-year-old. Maria laughed, ruffling his hair. "No, meu filho. It just means our story might help people understand why kindness matters." As they sat down to dinner, a family no longer shadowed by desperation, Maria felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun with a simple meal purchased for a hungry child had expanded to encompass not only her family and Tiago, but potentially hundreds of children who would benefit from the Foundation's work. It wasn't the life she had planned or expected, but standing at its threshold, Maria found herself profoundly grateful for the unexpected path that had led her here. The months following the Foundation's launch brought both triumphs and challenges. Word of Novo Começo spread quickly through the community, bringing a steady stream of families seeking services. What had begun with 20 children in the after-school program soon grew to 50, then 75, stretching the Foundation's resources and staff. Maria worked tirelessly, often arriving before dawn and leaving well after dark. She interviewed new staff members, developed curriculum, met with potential donors, and still made time to know each child by name. The work was demanding but deeply satisfying, a return to purpose that filled the void left by her teaching career. At home, the changes were equally significant. The family had moved to a comfortable apartment in a safer neighborhood with proper bedrooms for each child and a small study where Maria could occasionally work from home. The twins had transferred to a better school, where Carlos's aptitude for mathematics was finally receiving proper attention, and Sophia's artistic talents were being nurtured. Luisa, now in her final year of high school, was preparing university. Applications with a confidence that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier. Yet amid these positive developments, Maria noticed concerning patterns. Luisa, though thriving academically, seemed increasingly withdrawn at home. The twins, adjusting to their new school, sometimes spoke wistfully of old friends left behind, and Maria herself, despite her fulfillment at work, found that the demands of her position left precious little time for her family. These tensions came to a head one evening in October, 6 months after the Foundation's opening. Maria arrived home later than planned, having been delayed by a meeting with a potential corporate sponsor. She found Luisa sitting alone at the kitchen table, surrounded by university brochures. "I'm sorry I'm late," Maria said, setting down her bag. "The meeting with Constructora Nacional ran longer than expected. Where are the twins?" "At their friend's apartment downstairs," Luisa replied without looking up. "They ate 2 hours ago. I saved you a plate." The flat tone of her daughter's voice triggered Maria's concern. "Is everything all right, minha filha?" Luisa finally raised her eyes, revealing a weariness that shouldn't belong on a 17-year-old's face. "You've asked me that 3 times this week, Mama, always after coming home hours later than you said you would." The gentle rebuke stung precisely because it was justified. Maria sank into a chair across from her daughter. "The Foundation is still finding its footing. There's so much to do, so many children who need our help." "And what about your own children?" Luisa interrupted, her voice cracking slightly. "We hardly see you anymore. Sophia waited up until 10 o'clock last night to show you her art project before she finally gave up." Guilt flooded Maria's chest. "I didn't know." "Because you weren't here to know," Luisa continued, her frustration finally breaking through her usual composure. "We're proud of you, Mama. We're grateful for everything that's changed. But sometimes it feels like we've traded one kind of absence for another. Before, you were physically present but exhausted and worried all the time. Now, you're just not here." The truth of the observation left Maria momentarily speechless. She had been so focused on ensuring their financial security, on building something meaningful from the opportunity Tiago had provided, that she had failed to notice the cost to her family. "You're right," she finally said, reaching across the table to take Luisa's hand. "I've been so determined to make the Foundation succeed that I've been neglecting what matters most. I'm sorry, minha filha." Luisa's expression softened. "We understand how important the Foundation is, Mama. We just miss you." "I miss you too," Maria admitted, "more than you know." They sat in silence for a moment, hands clasped across the table. Then Luisa gestured toward the university brochures. "I wanted your advice on these. The applications are due next month." Maria looked at the colorful pamphlets advertising institutions across the country. "You've been researching all these on your own?" Luisa nodded. And talking to my school counselor. She thinks I should apply for the engineering program at the Federal University. They have scholarships for students with my grades. Engineering? Maria asked, surprised. When did you become interested in engineering? A flicker of hurt crossed Luisa's face. Last year when I took advanced physics. I talked about it at dinner several times. Another failure. Conversations Maria had been present for, but too preoccupied to properly register. I'm sorry. She said again, the inadequacy of the words painful in her mouth. Tell me about it now. Why engineering? As Luisa began to explain her interest in renewable energy systems and sustainable design, Maria listened with her full attention, making a silent promise to herself things would change. The foundation was important, but it could not come at the expense of her family. The next morning, Maria arrived at Novo Começo earlier than usual. She went straight to Tiago's office, where he was already reviewing financial reports. We need to talk, she said without preamble. Tiago looked up, immediately registering her serious expression. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong with the foundation, Maria assured him, taking a seat. It's my family. I'm not balancing things well, Tiago. I'm repeating the mistake I made as a teacher, giving everything to other people's children and not enough to my own. Tiago set aside the report he'd been reading. What do you need? The directness of the question, the absence of judgment or argument, reinforced Maria's certainty that she had found the right ally in Tiago. I need to restructure my role, delegate more, establish clearer boundaries between work and home. Done, Tiago said simply. We should have addressed this sooner. The foundation's growth has outpaced our staffing plans. It's not just about staffing, Maria explained. It's about my approach. I've been trying to personally oversee everything, meet with every family, review every program detail. It's not sustainable and it's not necessary. Tiago nodded thoughtfully. You've built a strong team. Perhaps it's time to trust them more fully. Exactly, Maria agreed. And I'd like to propose a new position, a deputy director who can handle administrative operations while I focus on program development and community partnerships. Someone who could eventually step into my role if needed. Do you have someone in mind? Tiago asked. Maria smiled. As a matter of fact, I do. Elena Cardoso from the Community Outreach Program. She has the administrative experience I lack, and she shares our vision completely. Tiago made a note. Consider it approved. What else? Fixed hours, Maria said firmly. I'll be fully present from 8 to 5, but after that my time belongs to my children. Barring genuine emergencies, of course. That seems more than reasonable, Tiago agreed. Anything else? Maria hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. Yes, I'd like to establish a family program at the foundation, one that recognizes that supporting children means supporting their parents too. Workshops on work-life balance, family resource groups, maybe even occasional family social events. Tiago's face broke into a wide smile. Now that sounds like the Maria Oliveira approach, turning a personal challenge into a community solution. Is that a yes? Maria asked, returning his smile. It's an enthusiastic yes, Tiago confirmed. Draft a proposal when you have time. No rush. Family first, remember? As Maria left Tiago's office, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. The conversation had been easier than anticipated, a reminder that she wasn't alone in building this new life. Tiago understood the importance of balance perhaps better than anyone, having once been a child whose own family struggled to provide basic necessities. That evening, Maria left work precisely at 5 o'clock, stopping on the way home to purchase ingredients for the twins' favorite meal. When she arrived, all 3 children were surprised to see her so early, a fact that reinforced the necessity of her decision. I have an announcement, she told them as they gathered around the dinner table. Starting today, I'll be home every evening in time for dinner. I've restructured my role at the foundation to make this possible. The twins reacted with immediate enthusiasm, while Luisa studied her mother with cautious optimism. Does this mean you'll come to my art exhibition? Next week, Sophia asked. And my math competition on Saturday, Carlos added. Yes and yes, Maria promised. And Luisa, I'd like to set aside time this weekend to properly review those university applications together, if that's all right with you." Luisa's smile was answer enough. As they ate dinner together, truly together, with Maria fully present and engaged in every conversation, she reflected on how easily priorities could become distorted, even with the best intentions. The Foundation's mission of supporting children couldn't be fulfilled at the expense of her own family's well-being. Both were essential parts of the legacy she hoped to build. Over the following weeks, the changes Maria implemented bore fruit, both at home and at work. Elena Cardoso thrived in her new role as deputy director, bringing organizational skills that complemented Maria's educational expertise. The family program launched with a well-attended workshop on helping children with homework, followed by a community dinner that brought Foundation families together. Most importantly, Maria regained the balance that had been missing. She was still dedicated to the Foundation, still inspired by its mission, but no longer at the cost of her relationships with Luisa, Carlos, and Sofia. She attended school events, helped with homework, and simply listened to their stories. The ordinary moments that she now recognized were anything but ordinary. One evening, as Maria helped Sofia with an art project for school, her daughter asked a question that caught her off guard. "Mama, do you ever miss the time before, when we had our old apartment?" Maria paused, considering the question carefully. "There are some things I miss," she admitted. "Our neighbors, the park nearby, the simplicity of our routines. But not the being poor part," Sofia clarified. Maria smiled at her daughter's directness. "No, not that part. Why do you ask, meu amor?" Sofia applied careful brushstrokes to her painting before answering. "Sometimes I feel guilty for being happy now, like we don't deserve it when other families are still struggling." The depth of the observation from her 12-year-old daughter momentarily took Maria's breath away. "Sofia, listen to me," she said gently. "We've been fortunate, yes, but that doesn't mean we don't deserve happiness, and it doesn't mean we've forgotten others who are struggling. That's why we work at the Foundation, to help create opportunities for more families to find stability and joy." Sofia nodded slowly, absorbing her mother's words. "Like paying it forward?" "Exactly like that," Maria agreed. "The kindness that came back to us through Tiago now extends to others through the Foundation, and someday those children might extend it further still." The concept seemed to satisfy Sofia, who returned to her painting with renewed focus. Maria watched her daughter's confident brushstrokes, marveling at the resilience and wisdom these children had developed through their experiences. That night, as Maria prepared for bed, she found herself reflecting on Sofia's question. Did she miss anything from before? The hardship, the constant worry, the physical exhaustion? No, she didn't miss those. But there had been valuable lessons in that difficult time. The importance of integrity, the strength of family bonds, the discovery of inner resources she hadn't known she possessed. Perhaps the most important lesson had been about the nature of dignity, that it wasn't tied to status or comfort, but to one's choices and principles. She had maintained her dignity even while collecting cardboard in the darkest hours of the night. And now, in her position of relative privilege, she carried that understanding with her, informing every decision she made at the Foundation. The following morning, Maria arrived at Novo Começo refreshed and centered, ready to begin a new day of balancing responsibilities at work and at home. As she walked through the courtyard, a young boy called out to her, "Diretora Maria, look what I made in the art class." It was Pedro, the boy who had been sitting alone on the Foundation's first day, now transformed into a confident child, proudly displaying a colorful painting. "It's beautiful, Pedro," Maria said sincerely, crouching to examine his work. "Tell me about it." As Pedro explained his artistic choices with animation, Maria felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged, helping children find their voices, their talents, their paths forward. But now she understood that this purpose didn't have to consume her entire life. There was room for balance, for family, for the simple joys that made everything else meaningful. Growing pains were inevitable in any significant transition. The key was to recognize them as opportunities for adjustment rather than signals of failure. In acknowledging her imbalance and taking steps to correct it, Maria had strengthened both her family and the foundation. As she walked with Pedro toward his classroom, Maria silently thanked Sofia for her insightful question. Sometimes the wisest teachers were the youngest ones, asking the questions that prompted the most important reflections. November brought cooler weather and exciting news. Louisa had received early acceptance to the Federal University's prestigious engineering program, along with a scholarship that would cover most of her expenses. The family celebrated with a special dinner at a restaurant, a luxury that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. As they raised their glasses in a toast to Louisa's achievement, Maria felt a surge of maternal pride so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Her eldest daughter, who had shouldered adult responsibilities during their darkest time, would now have the opportunity to pursue her own dreams. It was everything Maria had hoped for when she accepted Tiago's offer. "To Louisa," Maria said, her voice thick with emotion, "whose brilliance, determination and compassion will make the world a better place." "To Louisa," the twins echoed enthusiastically. Louisa blushed, unused to being the center of attention. "It's just university," she protested. "I haven't accomplished anything yet." "Getting this far is already an accomplishment," Maria corrected gently, "especially considering everything we've been through." "I couldn't have done it without all of you," Louisa admitted, her eyes meeting her mother's. "Especially you, Mama. You never let us give up hope, even when things were at their worst." The simple acknowledgement touched Maria deeply. During those difficult months, she had often wondered if she was failing her children. To hear now that Louisa had drawn strength from her example was a gift beyond measure. The celebration continued with dessert and more conversation about Louisa's plans for university. By the time they returned home, the twins were yawning, and even Louisa looked ready for an early night. As Maria was preparing for bed, her phone rang, an unusual occurrence at such a late hour. The screen displayed Tiago's name. "Tiago?" she answered, immediately concerned. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," he assured her quickly. "I apologize for calling so late. I just received some news that couldn't wait until morning." Maria sat on the edge of her bed, curious. What kind of news? "The Ministry of Education has announced a new initiative to reform school nutrition programs nationwide," Tiago explained, excitement evident in his voice. "They're seeking input from organizations with innovative approaches to student welfare." Maria immediately grasped the significance. "And they've contacted Novo Começo." "Better than that," Tiago replied. "They've specifically requested your participation on the advisory committee. Your story has resonated with someone influential, Maria. This is an opportunity to impact policy at the national level." The implications were staggering. What had begun as a single act of compassion, followed by months of hardship, might now lead to systemic change that could benefit thousands of children across the country. "I don't know what to say," Maria admitted. "Say yes," Tiago urged. "This is exactly what we hoped the Foundation could achieve. Not just direct service, but advocacy for broader reforms." "When would the committee begin its work?" Maria asked, practical considerations already forming in her mind. "January," Tiago replied. "Meetings would be in Brasilia, 1 week per month for 6 months. All expenses paid by the ministry, of course." January. The thought of being away from home for a week each month gave Maria pause. Louisa would be starting university, the twins would be in the middle of their school year, and the Foundation would be launching several new programs. "I need to think about the logistics," she said carefully. Being away from home and the Foundation for that amount of time would require significant planning. "Of course," Tiago agreed. "But please consider it seriously, Maria. Your perspective as an educator, as a parent, as someone who was punished for feeding a hungry child, would be invaluable to this committee." After ending the call, Maria sat motionless, absorbing the magnitude of the opportunity. If successful, the committee's work could lead to policies ensuring that no school administrator would ever again be forced to choose between following rules and meeting a child's basic needs. It was a chance to transform her personal injustice into positive change on a scale she had never imagined possible. Yet the prospect of regular travel to Brasilia raised practical concerns. Who would oversee the Foundation's daily operations? Who would support the twins with their schoolwork? How would her absence affect the family dynamics they had worked so hard to rebuild? The next morning, Maria shared the news with Eleanor and Tiago at the Foundation, discussing potential adjustments to their organizational structure that would allow for her periodic absence. Eleanor, now thriving in her role as deputy director, expressed confidence in her ability to manage operations during Maria's committee weeks. "The systems you've put in place are solid," she assured Maria, "and I'll have Tiago for backup if any major decisions arise." The conversation with her children that evening proved more complex. Maria gathered them in the living room after dinner, explaining the committee invitation and what it would mean for their family routine. "1 week each month doesn't sound like much," Carlos observed pragmatically. "That's still 3 weeks. Here? But which week?" Sophia asked, immediately identifying a potential conflict. "What if it's during a school performance or something important?" Luisa, approaching the situation with her characteristic maturity, asked more pointed questions. "Would you be able to arrange your schedule around key dates? How would we handle emergencies while you're away?" The discussion continued for over an hour, with Maria listening carefully to each concern and suggestion. By the end, a tentative plan had emerged. Maria would accept the committee position with the condition that she could coordinate her travel schedule to avoid significant family events. During her absence, Luisa would check in on the twins daily, though she would continue living in the university dormitory as planned. They would establish regular video call times to maintain connection, and Maria would return immediately if a genuine emergency arose. "So we all agree this is something I should do?" Maria asked, looking at each of her children in turn. "It's important, Mama," Luisa said simply. "It's a chance to change things for other families." Carlos nodded in agreement. "And it's only for 6 months." Sophia, always the most sensitive to changes, hesitated before adding, "As long as you promise to call every night." "Every single night," Maria confirmed, opening her arms to gather her youngest into a hug. With her family's support secured, Maria called Tiago the next morning to accept the committee position. His enthusiasm was matched by her own growing excitement about the possibilities ahead. "I'll notify the ministry immediately," he promised. "They'll be delighted." "This could be just the beginning, Maria. Your perspective, your story. They have the power to change minds at the highest levels." The following weeks were filled with preparations. At the Foundation, Maria worked with Elena to document procedures, clarify decision-making authorities, and ensure smooth operations during her planned absences. At home, she created detailed schedules for the twins, arranged for a neighbor to check in regularly, and stocked the freezer with pre-prepared meals. December arrived with its usual flurry of holiday activities, now enhanced by the Foundation's seasonal programs. Novo Começo hosted a winter celebration for participating families, complete with performances by the children, a community meal, and small gifts for each student. Maria moved through the event with a sense of wonder, remembering how differently they had spent the previous December, huddled in their cold apartment, surviving on the barest necessities. The contrast was similarly stark on Christmas Eve, when the Oliveira family gathered in their comfortable living room around a small but festive tree. There were proper gifts for each child this year: art supplies for Sophia, a scientific calculator, far superior to the second-hand one they had scraped together funds for months ago, for Carlos, and a new laptop for Luisa to take to university. As Maria watched her children unwrap these presents, she thought of all the less tangible gifts they had received over the past year: security, opportunity, dignity restored, and perhaps most importantly, the knowledge that kindness, even in its smallest forms, could return multiplied beyond imagination. After the children had gone to bed, Maria sat alone in the glow of the tree lights, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here and the new path that lay ahead. The committee work would be challenging, the travel disruptive, the political landscape complex. But if there was even a chance of creating systemic change, of ensuring that school policies supported rather than punished compassion, then any hardship would be worthwhile. Her phone buzzed with a message from Tiago. "Feliz Natal to you and your beautiful family. The coming year holds great things." Maria smiled as she typed her reply. "Feliz Natal to you as well. Thank you for making all of this possible." His response came quickly. "You made it possible, Professora. That day in the cafeteria, I merely returned what was given." The simple truth of his words resonated deeply. Whatever successes the future might hold for her family, for the foundation, for the committee work, they had begun with a single choice to place compassion above compliance, to see a hungry child as more important than a school policy. As Maria finally prepared for bed, she felt a sense of peaceful anticipation. The year ahead would bring new challenges, yes, but also new opportunities to extend the circle of kindness that had transformed her family's life. The proposal from the ministry was more than a professional opportunity. It was a chance to ensure that compassion could flow unimpeded through the educational system, reaching children who needed it most. With that thought warming her heart, Maria drifted to sleep, ready to embrace whatever the new year might bring. The Ministry of Education's conference room in Brasilia was imposingly formal, with its polished wood table, high-backed chairs, and panoramic views of the capital's distinctive architecture. Maria, dressed in a new suit purchased specifically for this occasion, tried to steady her nerves as other committee members filed in. It was the first meeting of the School Nutrition Reform Advisory Committee, and Maria was acutely aware of being an outsider. The other members were predominantly high-ranking officials, academics with multiple degrees, and representatives from established educational organizations. She, a former elementary school teacher and relatively new foundation director, felt conspicuously out of place. As Maria arranged her materials before her, a distinguished woman in her 60s took the adjacent seat. "You must be Maria Oliveira," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Dr. Helena Bastos, University of São Paulo. I've been following your foundation's work with great interest." Maria returned the smile, surprised and pleased to be recognized. "It's an honor to meet you, Dr. Bastos. I've read several of your papers on educational equity." "And I've read about your journey," Dr. Bastos replied. "That's actually why I requested to sit beside you today. We need your perspective on this committee, Maria. The rest of us live in theories and statistics. You've lived the reality." Before Maria could respond, the committee chair called the meeting to order. After introductions, the chair outlined the committee's mandate to develop recommendations for comprehensive reform of school nutrition programs nationwide, with particular attention to accessibility, quality, and administrative procedures. "We have 6 months to produce a report that could change how millions of children experience school," the chair emphasized. "Our recommendations will directly inform new legislation being prepared for the next congressional session." As the discussion began, Maria initially remained quiet, listening attentively as others debated technical aspects of nutrition standards and budget allocations. But when the conversation turned to enforcement mechanisms for program compliance, she felt compelled to speak. "If I may," she began, her voice steadier than she expected, "any policy we recommend must balance accountability with compassion. School administrators need clear guidelines, yes, but also the discretion to address immediate needs without fear of repercussions." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. "I'm speaking from experience," Maria continued. "As some of you may know, I lost my teaching position for providing a meal to a hungry student against school policy. That policy was designed with good intentions to ensure proper documentation of need and prevent favoritism. But in practice, it prioritized procedure over a child's immediate welfare." A man across the table, the representative from the School Administrators Association, leaned forward. "With respect, Senora Oliveira, schools must have standardized procedures. We can't have teachers making individual judgments about policy exceptions." "I understand the need for consistency," Maria acknowledged. "But might we consider policies that presume compassion rather than suspicion? What if the default position was to meet the child's need first, then address the documentation afterward?" Dr. Bastos nodded supportively. Senora Oliveira raises an excellent point. Our current systems often place the burden of proof on the hungry child or on the educator who recognizes that hunger. Perhaps we should invert that dynamic. The discussion that followed was robust and respectful. Rather than being dismissed as naive or impractical, Maria found her perspective seriously considered, her experiences valued as evidence rather than anecdote. By the end of the first day, she had contributed significantly to a framework that would guide their continuing work. As the committee adjourned, several members approached her with questions about Novo Começo's programs and her personal story. The school administrator's representative, who had initially seemed skeptical, asked if she would be willing to review draft guidelines from the administrator's perspective. We need to ensure whatever we propose can actually function in a school environment, he explained. Your experience on both sides, as a teacher and now as a program director, would be invaluable. Maria agreed readily, recognizing the opportunity to bridge perspectives that often remained disconnected in policy discussions. As she gathered her materials to leave, Dr. Bastos touched her arm lightly. "You did beautifully today," the older woman said. "Your voice is exactly what this committee needed." The affirmation from such a respected figure meant more than Maria could express. "Thank you," she said simply. "I was terrified." Dr. Bastos laughed. "Good. Fear means you understand the stakes. Just don't let it silence you." That evening, in her hotel room, Maria called home as promised. The twins eagerly shared details about their day, while Luisa, who had stopped by the apartment after university classes, reported that everything was running smoothly in Maria's absence. "How was the committee?" Luisa asked when the twins had relinquished the phone. "Better than I expected," Maria admitted. "They actually listened to me, Luisa. There's a real opportunity here to create meaningful change." "Of course they listened. To you, Mama," Luisa replied with characteristic directness. "You know more about this than any of them. You've lived it from every angle." The simple truth of her daughter's observation settled over Maria like a warm blanket. She had indeed experienced the issue from multiple perspectives, as a teacher trying to help within a flawed system, as a mother struggling to feed her own children, as a foundation director creating alternative approaches. These varied experiences, rather than disqualifying her as the committee might have initially assumed, were precisely what made her contribution valuable. The realization bolstered her confidence for the days ahead. Throughout the week-long session, Maria participated actively in discussions, drafted language for specific recommendations, and shared relevant examples from Novo Começo's programs. By the time she returned home, she had established herself as an essential voice on the committee, her practical wisdom complementing the theoretical expertise of her colleagues. The months that followed fell into a demanding but fulfilling rhythm. During her weeks in Brasilia, Maria immersed herself in the committee's work, gradually helping to shape a comprehensive reform proposal that would ensure no child went hungry in school, and no educator faced punishment for acts of basic compassion. During her weeks at home, she divided her time between the foundation and her family, maintaining the balance she had worked so hard to establish. The twins adjusted to her periodic absences, proudly telling friends that their mother was helping. The government fixed school lunches. Luisa thrived at university, her occasional visits home becoming cherished family occasions. And the foundation continued to grow under Elena's capable day-to-day management, with Maria providing strategic guidance and community leadership. As the committee neared completion of its work in June, an unexpected invitation arrived. The Minister of Education himself requested Maria's presence at a special session of Congress, where the committee's recommendations would be formally presented. She would be asked to speak briefly about her personal experience and how it informed the proposed reforms. "This is unprecedented," Tiago told her when she shared the news. "Committee members don't typically address Congress directly. Someone very influential must have advocated for your inclusion." Maria suspected Dr. Bastos, who had become both a mentor and friend over the past months. But regardless of who had arranged it, the opportunity to speak directly to lawmakers about an issue so close to her heart was both terrifying and exhilarating. The night before her scheduled appearance, Maria found herself unable to sleep. She paced her hotel room, reviewing her prepared remarks and wondering if her words could possibly convey the full significance of what was at stake. This wasn't merely about school meals or administrative procedures. It was about the kind of society they chose to build, one that either prioritized compassion or privileged compliance. When morning came, Maria dressed carefully in her best suit, securing her curls in a neat bun. As she applied a touch of lipstick, the same shade she had worn to her first meeting with Dr. Mendez, now almost a year ago, she studied her reflection. In the mirror. The woman who gazed back at her appeared confident, professional, purposeful, a far cry from the desperate figure who had once pushed a cart through darkened streets collecting cardboard. Yet Maria knew that both versions of herself were equally authentic, equally valuable. It was the experiences of that earlier self that gave her current work its urgency and meaning. The congressional chamber was intimidatingly grand, with tiered seating filled with lawmakers and spectators. Maria sat with the other committee members, trying to calm her racing heart as the Minister of Education presented their recommendations. To enthusiastic attention. "And now," the minister announced, "I would like to introduce someone whose personal story helped inspire these reforms. Her experience illustrates both the failings of our current system and the transformative power of compassion in education. Please welcome Maria Oliveira, Director of the Novo Começo Educational Foundation." As Maria approached the podium, the enormity of the moment threatened to overwhelm her. But then, scanning the visitors' gallery, she spotted them: Luisa, Carlos, and Sofia, all dressed in their best clothes, all beaming with pride. Beside them sat Tiago, who offered an encouraging nod. Drawing strength from their presence, Maria began to speak. "Honorable members of Congress, distinguished guests, thank you for the opportunity to address you today. I stand before you not as an expert in policy or a scholar of education, but as someone who has witnessed firsthand both the consequences of rigid systems and the possibilities of compassionate alternatives." Her voice grew stronger as she continued, sharing her story without embellishment. The hungry student, the simple meal provided, the harsh consequences that followed. She described her family's struggle for survival, the unexpected redemption there through Tiago's generosity, and the foundation that now served hundreds of children. "The reforms we propose today are not abstract concepts," she emphasized, gesturing toward the thick report before the congressional leadership. "They represent real children whose potential depends on our willingness to place their needs above procedural convenience. They represent real educators who should never have to choose between compassion and compliance." As she concluded her remarks, Maria looked directly at the assembled lawmakers. "Today, you have the opportunity to ensure that what happened to me cannot happen to another teacher, and that what almost happened to that hungry student, and to my own children during our darkest time, need never threaten another child in our schools. I urge you to embrace these recommendations and the vision of education they represent, one where kindness is not punished, but celebrated as the foundation of true learning." The chamber erupted in applause as Maria returned to her seat, her hands trembling slightly from the release of tension. Dr. Bastos squeezed her arm in silent congratulation, while the minister nodded approvingly. The remainder of the session passed in a blur of procedural discussions and formal acknowledgements. When it finally concluded, Maria made her way to the gallery where her family waited. "Mama, you were incredible," Sofia exclaimed, throwing her arms around Maria's waist. "They actually listened," Carlos observed with characteristic analytical precision. "You could see it in their faces." Luisa, now a poised young woman in her second semester of university, embraced her mother with tears in her eyes. "How you've changed things, Mama. Really changed them." "We don't know that yet," Maria cautioned, though her heart swelled with hope. "The recommendations still need to become law, and laws need to become practice." "But the circle is complete now," Tiago interjected, his expression thoughtful. "From that day in the cafeteria to this moment in Congress, a full revolution that brings us back to the beginning, but at a higher level. What began with one meal for one child may now protect thousands." The simple eloquence of his observation, resonated deeply with Maria. It was indeed a circle, not just for her personally, but for the principle of compassion itself. What had been punished might now be enshrined in policy, protected rather than prohibited. As they left the congressional building together, this unlikely family created by circumstance and choice, Maria felt a profound sense of completion. Whatever happened next with the legislation, she had done what once seemed impossible, transformed her moment of greatest injustice into a catalyst for systemic change. The final committee session the following day was largely ceremonial, thanking members for their service, discussing potential implementation timelines, exchanging contact information for future consultation. As the meeting adjourned, Dr. Bastos approached Maria with an unexpected proposal. The university's Education Policy Institute has a visiting practitioner position opening this fall, she said. 1 semester, teaching graduate students about real-world educational challenges and solutions. I've recommended you for consideration if you're interested. Maria blinked in surprise. Me? Teaching at the university level? Who better? Dr. Bastos asked simply. You've accomplished more meaningful education reform in 1 year than most academics achieve in a lifetime. My students would benefit enormously from your perspective. The offer was both flattering and intimidating. I would need to discuss it with my family, Maria said, and with Tiago and Elena regarding the foundation. Of course, Dr. Bastos replied. It's just something to consider. A way to extend your influence even further. As Maria boarded the plane home that evening, her mind whirled with possibilities. The committee work was concluding, but new doors were already opening. Opportunities to continue shaping educational approaches beyond the Foundation's direct services. Looking out the window as the aircraft lifted above Brasilia, Maria reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the depths of despair to the heights of influence, from invisibility to public recognition, from powerlessness to meaningful agency, the transformation seemed almost too profound to be real. Yet, it was real as the hungry child in the cafeteria had been, as real as the cold nights collecting cardboard, as real as the family waiting to welcome her home, all of it connected by a thread of compassion that had proven stronger than she could have imagined possible. As the plane banked toward home, Maria closed her eyes, filled with gratitude for the full circle her life had traveled and anticipation for where it might lead next. The School Nutrition Access Act passed with overwhelming support in September, incorporating nearly all of the committee's recommendations. The legislation established guaranteed meal access for all students, regardless of financial status, simplified application procedures for specialized nutrition programs, and, most significantly to Maria, included explicit protections for school staff who provided food to students in immediate need. News of the Act's passage reached Maria during a Foundation staff meeting. Elena interrupted the discussion with an excited announcement, having just received a news alert on her phone. The room erupted in cheers, with staff members hugging Maria and each other in celebration. "This is your legacy," Tiago told her later that day as they shared coffee in her office. "Your experience has literally changed the law of the land." Maria shook her head modestly. It was a team effort, the entire committee, the minister's support, the lawmakers who championed it. "True," Tiago acknowledged, "but it would never have happened without you, without what happened to you." The observation gave Maria pause. She had come to terms with her dismissal and its aftermath, but Tiago's framing shifted her perspective further. What had once seemed a cruel injustice now appeared as a necessary catalyst, painful, yes, but ultimately purposeful in a way she could never have anticipated. "Have you thought more about Dr. Bastos's offer?" Tiago asked, changing the subject. "The visiting position at the university?" Maria nodded. "I've discussed it with the children. They're supportive, especially Luisa, who's excited about having me on campus occasionally. And with the Foundation running smoothly under your and Elena's leadership, you should accept," Tiago said firmly. "Your story deserves to be shared with the next generation of educators and policymakers. Think of it as another form of legacy building." After careful consideration, Maria did accept the position, arranging to teach one graduate seminar per week at the university while maintaining her leadership role at Novo Começo. The arrangement allowed her to share her experiences with future educational leaders while continuing the foundation work that remained her primary passion. Her first day in the university classroom brought unexpected nervousness. These were graduate students, future principals, policy analysts, educational researchers. What could she, with her modest educational background, offer such advanced scholars? But as she began to speak, sharing not just her personal story, but the insights it had yielded about educational systems, compassionate leadership, and institutional change, Maria discovered a natural authority born of authentic experience. The students listened with rapt attention, their questions revealing genuine engagement with the complex issues she presented. Theory matters, she told them in that first session, but lived reality matters equally. The best educational policies emerge when both perspectives inform each other. By semester's end, Maria's seminar had become one of the most sought-after courses in the department, with students from multiple disciplines requesting permission to audit. Dr. Bastos, who had initially championed her appointment, spoke of extending it into a permanent position. "You've brought something unique to our program," the professor told her, "a grounding in reality that academic discourse often lacks." At home, life had settled into new patterns. Luisa thrived in her second year of engineering studies, occasionally bringing university friends home for dinner. The twins, now 13, were developing distinct personalities and interests. Sophia increasingly devoted to art and literature, Carlos absorbed by mathematics and computer programming. Both were excelling academically, benefiting from educational opportunities that would have been unimaginable during the family's difficult time. The foundation, meanwhile, continued to expand its reach. What had begun with after-school programs now included weekend workshops, parent education classes, teacher training initiatives, and advocacy partnerships with similar organizations across the country. The original cohort of children had shown remarkable progress, with improved academic performance, increased confidence, and strengthened family relationships. One cool evening in October, as Maria walked through the foundation building after hours, she paused in the now empty cafeteria. The space was pristine, tables neatly arranged for the next day's meals. On the wall hung a simple plaque, installed during the Foundation's first anniversary celebration. "No act of kindness, however small, is ever wasted." The quote had been Tiago's suggestion, a simple truth that encompassed all that Novo Começo represented. As Maria stood contemplating the plaque, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she found Pedro, now 11 years old and one of the Foundation's notable success stories. Once withdrawn and hungry, he had blossomed into a confident student with particular talents in science and writing. "Diretora Maria," he said, with his characteristic seriousness, "I wanted to show you something before I go home." He handed her a slightly crumpled paper, an essay assignment from his school. The title read, "The Person I Admire Most." With a mixture of curiosity and trepidation, Maria began to read. The essay, written in Pedro's careful handwriting, described a woman who had lost everything because she fed a hungry child, who had worked collecting garbage to support her family, and who had ultimately created a place where children like him could find not just food but acceptance and opportunity. "You wrote this about me?" Maria asked, deeply moved. Pedro nodded solemnly. "My teacher said we should write about someone who changed our life. That's you." The simple declaration, so earnest, so unequivocal, touched Maria profoundly. She had never sought recognition or acclaim, had never imagined becoming someone's hero. Yet here was evidence that her journey mattered not just in abstract policy terms, but in the concrete reality of a child's life. "Thank you for sharing this with me, Pedro," she said, carefully returning the essay. "It's one of the greatest honors I've ever received." After Pedro left, escorted home by a Foundation staff member, Maria remained in the cafeteria, reflecting on the unexpected ways her life's work was creating ripples beyond her direct influence. Pedro would grow up with a different understanding of justice, compassion, and possibility because of what he had witnessed and experienced at Novo Começo, and he was just one of hundreds of children whose lives had been touched by the foundation. That night, Maria shared Pedro's essay with her family over dinner. Luisa, home for the weekend, listened with obvious pride in her mother. The twins, who had heard Maria's story in fragments over time, but never as others perceived it, seemed to see her with new eyes. "So you're famous now?" Carlos asked with a teasing smile. "Hardly," Maria laughed. "But it's a good reminder that our actions can influence others in ways we don't always recognize. Like how you influenced that whole law," Sophia observed. "It all started because you bought lunch for Tiago." The simplicity of her daughter's summary struck Maria anew. One meal, one small act of basic decency. The consequences had spiraled outward in ever-widening circles, touching lives she would never know, creating possibilities she could never have engineered deliberately. Later that evening, Maria received an unexpected call from Dr. Bastos. "I hope I'm not disturbing your evening," the professor began, "but I've just received some news you should hear immediately. The National Education Council has selected you to receive this year's Transformative Leadership Award. It's their highest honor for contributions to educational reform." Maria was momentarily speechless. The National Education Council was the country's most prestigious educational body, comprised of distinguished scholars, administrators, and policy leaders. "There must be some mistake," she finally managed. "I'm not—" "Stop right there," Dr. Bastos interrupted firmly. "You are precisely who they intend to honor. The selection committee specifically cited your journey from classroom teacher to policy influencer, and the unique perspective you've brought to both roles. The formal announcement will come tomorrow, but I wanted you to hear it from a friend first." After the call ended, Maria sat in stunned silence. The award represented recognition from the very educational establishment that had once cast her out. The irony was not lost on her. When she finally shared the news with her children, their celebrations were joyous but unsurprised, as if this acknowledgement was merely the natural culmination of what they had always known about their mother. "Will you have to give a speech?" Sophia asked with practical concern. "I expect so," Maria replied, already feeling nervous at the prospect. "You'll be wonderful," Luisa assured her. "Just tell your story like you do in your university class. That's all you need." The award ceremony was held in December at the National Museum, an elegant venue that intimidated Maria, despite her growing comfort in professional settings. Dressed in a new gown, Sophia had insisted on accompanying her shopping. She sat among educational luminaries, still half convinced her presence was some elaborate mistake. When her name was called, the applause was sustained and genuine. As Maria made her way to the podium, she caught sight of her family and friends in the audience. Luisa, Carlos, and Sophia in the front row, alongside Tiago, Elena, and Dr. Bastos. Behind them were rows of Novo Começo staff members and even some of the Foundation's older students, including Pedro, wide-eyed at the grand surroundings. Drawing strength from their presence, Maria began to speak. "I stand before you today, not as an exceptional individual, but as a witness to the exceptional potential of compassion in education. My story is not remarkable for what I did. Buying lunch for a hungry student was the most basic human response, not an act of heroism. What is remarkable is what happened afterward, how a system designed to educate children punished an effort to meet a child's most fundamental need." She paused, surveying the attentive faces before her. "But this award does not recognize past injustice. It celebrates what we have collectively accomplished since then, a foundation that serves hundreds of children daily, curriculum that integrates academic excellence with emotional support, and most significantly, national legislation that ensures no educator will ever again face termination for feeding a hungry student." Maria gestured toward her family, toward Tiago, toward the Foundation staff members in the audience. "This is their award as much as mine. We have created these changes together, proving that systems can be transformed when enough people commit to placing compassion at the center of education." As she concluded her remarks, Maria felt a sense of completion. The journey that had begun in humiliation and hardship had led to this moment of public honor. Not because she had sought recognition, but because she had remained true to the simple, principle that had guided her from the beginning, that kindness matters, that children's needs must come first, that systems should serve people rather than the reverse. The standing ovation that followed seemed to affirm not just her words, but the collective journey they had all taken, from that cafeteria moment to this celebratory evening, from individual compassion to institutional change. Later, as they gathered for a private dinner at a restaurant Tiago had reserved for the occasion, Maria found herself surrounded by the people who had made this transformation possible. There was Luisa, confidently discussing engineering concepts with Dr. Bastos. There were the twins, growing so quickly into young people with their own dreams and perspectives. There was Tiago, whose generosity had extended far beyond financial support to genuine partnership in building something meaningful. And there were the foundation staff members, the university colleagues, the committee connections, a network of relationships that had expanded Maria's influence far beyond what she could have achieved alone. As glasses were raised in celebration, Maria felt overwhelming gratitude for this constellation of people who had helped transform her moment of greatest vulnerability into a platform for meaningful change. The award, the recognition, the professional achievements, these were gratifying, certainly. But looking around the table at the faces of those she loved, Maria knew that her true legacy resided not in plaques or titles, but in lives touched, systems improved, and compassion institutionalized. One meal for one hungry child had set it all in motion. Everything that followed, the hardship, the redemption, the foundation, the policy work, had flowed from that single moment of choosing kindness over compliance. As the evening drew to a close, Maria found herself standing beside Tiago, watching their assembled friends and family sharing stories and laughter. "Did you ever imagine this outcome?" she asked quietly, "when you appeared at my door that night?" Tiago considered the question thoughtfully. "I hoped to help you as you had helped me," he replied. "But this," he gestured toward the gathered company, toward all they had built together, "this has exceeded even my most optimistic visions." "Mine too," Maria admitted. "There were moments during our hardest time when I wondered if that one act of kindness had been worth the cost. Now I know it was worth infinitely more than I could have calculated." Tiago nodded, his expression solemn. "Some decisions reveal their full value only with time. You could not have known where that moment would lead." "No," Maria agreed. "But I think I would have made the same choice again, even knowing the difficulties that would follow." "That," Tiago said with a smile, "is precisely why you deserve this award, and precisely why I knew, from the moment I found you again, that you were the perfect person to lead the foundation." As the gathering dispersed for the evening, Luisa, returning to her university dormitory, the twins heading home with a trusted foundation staff member, the others to their respective households, Maria found herself reflecting on how completely her life had transformed in less than 2 years. From teacher to outcast, from waste picker to foundation director, from policy victim to policy influencer, the journey had been neither linear nor predictable. Yet each step, even the painful ones, had contributed to the person she had become and the work she now performed. The greatest legacy of her experience, Maria realized, was not the foundation or the legislation or the educational reforms, significant as these were. It was the living demonstration that compassion could prevail even against systemic resistance, that kindness could multiply rather than diminish when shared, that individual choices could ultimately reshape collective norms. As she finally returned home that night, the award carefully placed on a shelf alongside family photographs, Maria felt a deep sense of peace. The circle that had begun with a simple meal shared with a hungry student had expanded to encompass hundreds of lives, thousands of meals and countless moments of compassion enabled rather than prevented. It was, she reflected as she prepared for sleep, the most meaningful legacy anyone could hope to establish, not buildings or programs or policies alone, but a reinforced conviction that kindness matters, that it endures, that it returns in ways we can never fully anticipate, but can always gratefully receive. 5 years after the opening of Novo Começo, the foundation hosted a special celebration. What had begun as a small after-school program now encompassed multiple sites across the city, serving over 1,000 children annually with educational support, nutritional assistance and family resources. The anniversary event was held in the original building, now expanded to include additional classrooms, a computer lab, art studios, and a larger cafeteria. Former students returned to share their experiences. Community partners displayed collaborative projects, and government officials, including representatives from the Ministry of Education, spoke about the foundation's impact on educational policy nationwide. Maria, now a nationally recognized advocate for educational reform, moved through the celebration with quiet pride. At 50, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had weathered significant storms and emerged not merely intact but strengthened. Her once dark hair showed strands of silver, and fine lines had formed at the corners of her eyes, physical evidence of both challenges endured and joys experienced. As she greeted guests and accepted congratulations, Maria's attention remained focused on the true measure of the foundation's success, the children themselves. They performed music they had learned in foundation programs, displayed artwork created in the studios, and demonstrated scientific projects developed under the guidance of volunteer mentors. Their confidence, their engagement, their evident well-being, these were the achievements that mattered most. In a quiet moment during the festivities, Maria found herself standing with Tiago in the cafeteria where it had all begun, both the original act of kindness and the foundation that grew from it. 5 years, Tiago mused, watching as children and parents enjoyed a celebration meal together. Sometimes it seems just yesterday that we opened these doors. And sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago, Maria added. So much has changed. Indeed, the transformations had been profound. The School Nutrition Access Act had been implemented nationwide, ensuring that all children had access to meals regardless of family circumstances. The Foundation's model had been studied and replicated in cities across the country. And Maria herself had become an influential voice in educational circles, balancing her foundation leadership with university teaching, policy consultation, and occasional speaking engagements. Her family too had evolved. Luisa had graduated with honors in engineering and now worked for a renewable energy company, developing solar power systems for underserved communities. The twins were preparing for university themselves, Sophia pursuing visual arts, Carlos mathematical physics. All three maintained close connections to Novo Começo, volunteering regularly and contributing their developing skills to its programs. I received an interesting invitation yesterday, Maria told Tiago as they observed the celebration. The International Education Forum wants me to speak at their conference in Geneva next spring. They're focusing on compassionate educational systems. Tiago smiled. You should accept. Your experience has relevance far beyond our borders. Maria nodded thoughtfully. I might, though it's still strange to think that my story would interest people in other countries. Not strange at all, Tiago countered. The tension between rigid systems and human needs exists everywhere. You've lived a case study in resolving that tension effectively. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Pedro, now 16, and serving as a peer mentor for younger students at the foundation. No longer the withdrawn child Maria had first encountered, he had developed into a thoughtful young man with aspirations to become a teacher himself. Diretora Maria, he said with characteristic formality despite their years of association, the first group of students is ready for the ceremony. They're waiting in the main hall. Thank you, Pedro, Maria replied warmly. We'll be right there. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. The presentation of completion certificates to the Foundation's longest participating students, many of whom had been present since its opening day. Now teenagers preparing for their next educational steps, these young people represented the Foundation's first graduating class. As Maria called each name and presented each certificate, she found herself reflecting on the individual journeys these children had taken. Many had come to Novo Começo from circumstances of significant hardship, poverty, family instability, educational challenges, all had found not just material support, but a community that believed in their potential and provided tools to realize. Following the certificate presentation, one of the graduating students, a young woman named Isabella who had overcome severe math anxiety to become an accomplished student, stepped forward to speak on behalf of the group. "Before Novo Começo," she began, her voice clear despite evident nerves, "many of us didn't believe we had futures worth planning for. Some of us were hungry, not just for food, but for attention, for encouragement, for someone to see possibilities in us that we couldn't see ourselves." She gestured toward Maria and the assembled foundation staff. "These people didn't just feed us, they showed us how to grow. They didn't just teach us subjects, they taught us to believe in our own capabilities. They didn't just give us a place to go after school, they gave us a community where we belong." Isabella's simple eloquence brought tears to many eyes, including Maria's. This outcome that could never have been fully predicted or quantified was what Novo Começo had been created to achieve. Not just improved test scores or higher graduation rates, though these were indeed being realized, but transformed self-perception and expanded horizons. After the ceremony concluded and the celebration continued, Maria found a quiet corner to collect her thoughts. The day had been emotional in the best possible way, a validation of everything they had worked to build over the past 5 years. Dr. Bastos, now a regular collaborator with the foundation, joined her in this moment of reflection. "You should be very proud," the professor said simply. "I am," Maria acknowledged, "not of myself but of what we've created together, of what these children have achieved with the right support." "And yet," Dr. Bastos observed perceptively, "there's something more on your mind today." Maria smiled at her friend's insight. "I've been thinking about legacy," she admitted, "about what all of this will mean in 10 years, in 20. Will it last? Will it continue to evolve as needs change? That," Dr. Bastos replied, "is the question that distinguishes true leaders from mere managers. You're concerned not just with today's success, but with ongoing relevance and sustainability." "Exactly," Maria agreed. "The foundation is strong now. Our programs are effective. Our funding is stable thanks to Tiago and the partnerships we've developed. But I want to ensure that the core principle, compassion as the foundation of education, remains central even as specific initiatives evolve." "Then perhaps that's your next project," Dr. Bastos suggested, "creating mechanisms to preserve the essential while allowing for necessary adaptation." The notion resonated with Maria. She had been so focused on building and expanding the foundation that she had given less attention to ensuring its longevity beyond her direct involvement. Yet if Novo Começo was truly to represent a lasting legacy, it needed to be able to thrive independently of its founders. That evening, as the celebration wound down and staff members began the process of cleaning up, Maria found herself again in the cafeteria. The space was now empty of guests, the tables cleared, the kitchen quiet after hours of activity. Tiago joined her, loosening his tie with a sigh of relief. "Successful day," he observed. "Very," Maria agreed. "But it's got me thinking about the future, about ensuring that what we've built outlasts us." Tiago nodded thoughtfully. "I've been considering the same question. The foundation has a solid financial endowment now, but money alone doesn't preserve vision." "Exactly," Maria said. "We need to codify the principles, train future leaders, create systems that embody our values so deeply that they can't easily be abandoned." "Sounds like a new phase of work," Tiago observed. "It does," Maria agreed. "Building was the first phase. Sustaining and evolving will be the next." As they discussed possibilities, mentorship programs for staff, leadership development, initiatives, formal articulation of the Foundation's guiding philosophies, Maria felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't an endpoint, but another beginning, another opportunity to extend the impact of that original act of compassion. Later that night, after returning home to an apartment now quieter with Luisa gone and the twins increasingly independent, Maria took time to review photographs from the day's celebration. Images of smiling children, engaged families, dedicated staff members, all testament to what could grow from the simplest seed of human kindness. One photograph particularly caught her attention. A casual shot taken during lunch, showing children of various ages sharing a meal together at one of the cafeteria tables. Their plates were full, their expressions animated in conversation. Nothing special, nothing staged, just children eating together, secure in the knowledge that their basic needs would be met so they could focus on learning, growing, developing. Full plates. The simplicity of the image belied its profound significance. How many educational challenges stemmed from empty plates, literally or metaphorically? How many children struggled to learn because basic needs remained unaddressed? How much potential went unrealized because systems prioritized procedures over people? The Novo Começo approach, ensuring full plates of both food and opportunity, had demonstrated its effectiveness not just through the Foundation's programs, but through the national policy changes it had inspired. Yet there remained so many children beyond their reach, so many educational systems still caught in rigid frameworks that sometimes hurt the very students they aimed to serve. As Maria prepared for bed, she found herself formulating a new goal: to document and disseminate the Novo Começo model more widely, to create resources that other communities could adapt to their specific contexts, to advocate for the principle of full plates as a prerequisite for effective education. This would be her continuing work, not just leading the Foundation through its next phase, but extending its impact through sharing, teaching, and advocating. The invitation to speak in Geneva suddenly seemed not merely an honor, but an opportunity to advance this broader mission. The thought brought a smile to Maria's lips as she drifted toward sleep. From that momentous day in the school cafeteria to this point of international recognition, the journey had been neither linear nor predictable. Yet each step, each challenge, each unexpected turn had contributed to a path she could now recognize as uniquely hers to walk. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, new questions, new opportunities to extend the circle of compassion that had transformed her life and touched so many others. The Foundation would continue to evolve. Her children would pursue their own paths, and Maria herself would keep sharing the simple truth she had learned through experience: that kindness, even in its smallest expressions, contains the power to change not just individual lives, but entire systems. As consciousness faded into dreams, Maria's final thoughts were of gratitude for the second chance she had received, for the family she cherished, for the meaningful work that engaged her talents, and for the original act of compassion that had set everything in motion. One meal for one hungry child, a simple choice that any decent person might make. Yet from that small seed had grown a harvest of transformation that continued to yield fruit beyond anything she could have imagined. Full plates, full hearts, full circle. The story that had begun in deprivation had culminated in abundance, not merely material, but spiritual, emotional, communal. And in that abundance lay the most profound legacy of all, the living proof that compassion, when chosen even at personal cost, eventually returns multiplied beyond measure.